It started like any other Monday morning in Cambridge, mist rolling off the Charles River, crimson ivy clinging to brick walls, and the lecture hall at Sanders Theatre filling slowly with Harvard's brightest minds. The course was Mathematical Frontiers, and the man at the podium was Professor Alan Whittaker, a legend in the world of applied mathematics and a name that could inspire awe, or terror, depending on who you asked. He walked in exactly at 9 a.m. sharp lines on his blazer, a navy tie knotted with military precision, leather shoes echoing on the marble floor. No smile. Just a thick folder of handwritten notes, a wooden pointer, and his usual air of complete authority. Without preamble, he picked up a piece of chalk and turned to the blackboard. "This," he said, writing a dense string of symbols with a few quick strokes, "is something none of you can solve. Not you. Not your PhDs. Not the faculty upstairs. This is the one problem no one in this building has cracked. Not yet." His voice was clipped, clinical. Cold. The students, grad level, hand-picked, elite, sat silently, their eyes narrowed. Some scribbled what he wrote. Others stared in that paralyzed way students do when they're unsure whether they're witnessing genius or madness. The equation was layered with infinite series, twisted functions, an implied topological mapping even the best of them hadn't seen in practice. "I'm offering no extra credit. This won't be on any exam. This is just a reminder that there's always something bigger than you," he said, turning back to face the crowd. "Any takers?" Silence. Whittaker was used to silence. He welcomed it. The pause added weight to his authority. He was preparing to move on, to dive into the scheduled lecture, until something entirely unexpected happened. A hand rose. One small, dark-skinned hand, from the very back row. Murmurs spread instantly. Heads turned. Necks craned. It was a kid. A literal kid. He couldn't have been older than 12. Baggy jeans, beat-up sneakers, a Harvard hoodie that hung on his small frame like a parachute. His backpack sat like a boulder beside him, stuffed with who knows what, and his wide, focused eyes stared directly at Whittaker like this moment had been waiting its turn his entire life. Whittaker blinked, genuinely caught off guard. "You must be in the wrong room, son." The boy stood. "No, sir. I'm not." Gasps fluttered through the lecture hall. One of the doctoral students whispered, "Is this a prank?" Another muttered, "Somebody lost their nephew." But the boy wasn't smiling. Wasn't joking. Wasn't playing. "My name's Lasimba Jackson," he said calmly. "And I'd like to try." The entire hall paused like a collective heartbeat had been skipped. Whittaker narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Jackson, this is Harvard. This isn't show and tell." "I know," the boy replied, unshaken. "I didn't come to show. I came to solve." A few students chuckled. One even snorted. But something in the professor's expression shifted, barely, but it shifted. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was disbelief sharpened by habit. Either way, Whittaker gestured stiffly toward the board. "Then, Mr. Jackson," he said dryly, "the floor is yours." Lasimba picked up his backpack, swung it over one shoulder, and descended the steps of the amphitheater like he was entering a gladiator arena. The shuffle of his sneakers echoed louder than it should have. Some students pulled out phones. Others leaned in. He reached the board. Picked up the chalk. Stared at the swirling monster of symbols. And then, he began. Not with panic. Not with hesitation. With clarity. He didn't rewrite the equation. He reframed it. He pointed out a symmetry in the third function, one no one had noticed. He mapped a transformation that reduced the entropy of the integral expression, making a discontinuous element suddenly tractable. His chalk danced, but not aimlessly, there was intention in every stroke. The room had gone silent, a kind of reverence normally reserved for music or prayer. Whitaker was no longer leaning back. He stepped forward, squinting at the logic unfolding before him. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. The boy was speaking fluently in the very language he'd spent 40 years mastering. Lysimba stopped after 5 lines. Turned. It's not a full proof, he said, his voice even. But it gets closer than anything I've seen. A beat. Whitaker slowly walked up to the board. His fingers brushed the equations, then traced them back again, following the boy's approach. He frowned, not in dismissal, but in concentration. The hall waited for his verdict like a courtroom awaiting a sentence. Finally, he said, "Where did you learn this?" Lysimba answered simply. "My mom. Harlem. And the internet." A few students blinked. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some didn't know what to think. Whitaker studied the boy again, really studied him this time. "You're not enrolled. You're not even auditing." "No," Lysimba said. "But I'm here." The professor didn't speak for a moment. Then he turned to the class. "Well," he said, voice flat, "it seems we've just witnessed the most unexpected thing I've seen in this room in 20 years. Lysimba handed him the chalk. Someone clapped. Then another. Then a wave of cautious, then genuine applause swept through the room. Not everyone joined in. A few students looked annoyed, even threatened. Some whispered under their breath, "Just a trick." Someone fed him the answer. "Lucky guess." But Whitaker wasn't applauding. He was staring at the equation again, jaw tight, mind spinning. It wasn't just that the kid had ideas. It was that he saw the problem differently. And more dangerously, it made sense. Later that afternoon, in a quiet corner of Harvard Yard, Lysimba sat alone, eating the squashed peanut butter sandwich he'd packed that morning. No friends here. No camera crews. No fanfare. Just a kid. And a future that had just cracked open like sunlight through concrete. Inside his blazer pocket, Professor Whitaker held a scrap of notebook paper the boy had left behind, covered in scribbles, formulas, and a simple handwritten phrase. "Everything is impossible until you try." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The sun was setting over Harlem, casting long shadows over the brownstone buildings and painting the streets with a warm, golden glow. It was the kind of evening that made everything feel alive, vibrant and pulsing with possibility. But for Lysimba Jackson, it was just another evening in a city that never seemed to sleep, a city that often tried to sleep on him. His mother, Janelle, stood at the small kitchen counter, stirring a pot of vegetable stew. She had worked 2 shifts at the hospital that day and still found the energy to cook dinner. Her back was aching, but she wasn't complaining. Not anymore. She had learned long ago that complaining got you nowhere, especially when you were a single mother working 2 jobs in a neighborhood where survival wasn't guaranteed. Lysimba, for his part, was sitting at the worn-out dining table, his legs swinging in the air as he scribbled something in his notebook. His hoodie, the one he wore every day, hung too big for him, and the sleeves nearly covered his hands, but he didn't mind. The numbers and symbols he was writing seemed to take up every part of his focus. "Lysimba," Janelle called, her voice a soft but firm note in the dimly lit kitchen. "Dinner's ready. You've been at that for hours. Come eat." But Lysimba barely looked up. He was used to tuning everything out when he was in the zone. His mother's voice, the world outside, the loud sounds of the city, it all faded when he was working through a problem. Math was his refuge. A place where no one could tell him what he could or couldn't do. "1 minute, Mom," he called back, his pencil flying across the page. Janelle walked over, leaned over his shoulder, and took a quick glance at the notebook. Her eyes softened as she recognized what he was working on. He was trying to solve equations again, just like he always did, even though no one had ever taught him this stuff. Not at school, not in his neighborhood. And certainly not at home. "Lysimba, honey," she said, gently taking the pencil from his hand, "you can't work all night. You need sleep. And a real meal." Lysimba paused for a moment, looking up at his mom. There was love in her eyes, but there was also something else, a tiredness that came from too many sleepless nights, too many worries about bills and rent. And yet, despite it all, she had always supported him. She had always made sure he had what he needed to keep going. "I'll finish it tomorrow, I promise," he said, closing the notebook with a small sigh. "But, Mom, what if I'm close? What if I'm onto something big?" Janelle smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. "Lysimba, you are big. You're so much more than any equation you could solve." He shrugged, still unconvinced. "But math makes sense. I can make it make sense." She chuckled, sitting down beside him. "I know, baby. I know. But sometimes making sense of the world means taking a break from it, too." Lysimba's mind wandered back to the world outside. The world that told him people like him didn't belong in the places where the answers were. The world that made him feel like an outsider in the very city he loved. But then, there was his mother. Always pushing him to see beyond the streets, beyond the expectations, to a future where none of that mattered. "I don't care what people say," Lysimba muttered, his voice quiet but determined. "I'm going to show them. I'm going to show the world that I belong in places they never thought I would." Janelle looked at him for a long moment, her expression shifting as she realized the weight of his words. This wasn't just about equations anymore. This was about something deeper. Something he had been carrying with him for a long time. "You don't have to show the world, Lysimba," she said softly. "You just have to show yourself. You're enough just as you are." Lysimba wasn't so sure. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he grabbed his plate and sat down to eat, his mind still racing with numbers, shapes, and ideas that seemed to swirl just out of reach. The stew was warm and comforting, but his thoughts were already miles away, thinking about the future. Harlem had always been a place of dreams and harsh realities. It was where Lysimba grew up, where he learned to survive, and where his mind had begun to take flight. It wasn't the kind of place where you expected to find someone like him. Harlem, with its poverty and crime, was a place where dreams often got buried beneath the weight of everyday survival. But Lysimba was different. From an early age, Lysimba had always been fascinated by the patterns in everything. Whether it was the way the cracks in the sidewalk seemed to form geometric shapes or the rhythm of the subway trains rattling by, it was all math. Every sound, every movement, every pattern had its own logic. He could see it, even if no one else could. At school, he was that quiet kid who sat in the back, his mind often lost in equations and theorems that no one else understood. He wasn't a bad student, but he was often bored. The teachers didn't have time for kids like him. The textbooks were outdated, and the classrooms were overcrowded. No one could teach him what he needed to know. But he didn't care. He wasn't going to let that stop him. Lysimba found his answers on the internet. Late at night, when the world was asleep, he would dive deep into online lectures, videos, and articles. He would go through college-level textbooks, piecing together what he could. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to keep him going. Enough to keep him dreaming. And those dreams had led him to Harvard. Not the traditional path, not the easy one. But the one that made sense to him. He had walked into that lecture hall not because he had been invited, but because he had earned it. In his mind, there was no other place he belonged. As he sat on that bench in Harvard's yard, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had just stunned the greatest minds in the room, but for a moment, he just wanted to be a kid. To not think about equations and the future. To just be Lysimba, sitting under the same sky that had always watched over him. It was then that he realized something: he wasn't just trying to prove himself to anyone else. He wasn't trying to make the world believe in him. He was doing this for his mom. For Harlem. For everyone who had told him he couldn't. Because, as Lucinda had learned long ago, the world would try to tell you that you're too small, too young, too different, but all you had to do was raise your hand. And when you did, the world would listen. The next morning, Lucinda woke up to the familiar hum of the city. The sound of the subway rumbled beneath his window, and the distant voices of street vendors carried through the cracks in the building's walls. It was the usual soundtrack of his life in Harlem. But today, the world felt different. The events of the previous day had unfolded like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. He could hardly believe it himself. How had he walked into that lecture hall? How had he stood in front of Professor Whitaker, surrounded by hundreds of Harvard's finest minds, and solved a problem they had struggled with for years? It seemed impossible, even to him. But somehow, he had done it. And now, the world was watching. Lucinda had spent the night replaying the scene in his mind over and over. The way the students had looked at him, their wide eyes filled with disbelief. The professor's stern gaze, slowly transforming into one of grudging respect. The applause, awkward at first, then growing louder, as if everyone had realized something they hadn't expected to see: a 12-year-old kid from Harlem had just outsmarted them all. But with the triumph came a sense of unease. Lucinda knew that the attention he had gained wasn't all positive. There were whispers, even in the halls of Harvard, that the young prodigy might have been a fluke, just a lucky guess. But Lucinda wasn't interested in being a fluke. He wanted something bigger. Something more lasting. At breakfast, Lucinda's mother, Janelle, handed him a bowl of oatmeal, the steam rising in gentle curls. She was trying to act like everything was normal, but Lucinda could see the excitement in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured him a glass of orange juice. She was proud of him, yes, but there was also a lingering worry. She could feel the weight of what had happened yesterday, even if Lucinda didn't fully understand it yet. "You're really something, Lucinda," she said softly as he spooned the oatmeal into his mouth. "I didn't expect you to do that. To make them take you seriously." Lucinda looked up at his mother, his eyes wide with a mix of uncertainty and determination. "I didn't expect it either, Mom. But now they're going to expect me to do it again. And I'm not sure I can." Janelle smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "You don't have to be perfect, honey. You just have to be you. If you try your best, that's all anyone can ask for." "I know," Lucinda said, but his voice carried the weight of an idea far too big for someone his age. "But it's not just about me anymore, Mom. It's about what this means. What it means for people like me." Janelle's expression softened. She understood. Her son wasn't just a math genius. He wasn't just a kid who had shown up at Harvard and blown everyone away. He was something else. He was the embodiment of every dream Harlem had ever held on to, every hope that one day someone from this neighborhood would rise above the struggles, the violence, the poverty, and make it into the world that had always looked the other way. And in that moment, Lucinda realized something else too: he wasn't just representing himself. He was representing everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. Everyone who had ever been overlooked. Everyone who had been dismissed as just another statistic. The next few days passed in a blur. Lucinda's phone buzzed constantly with messages from people he didn't even know, news outlets, professors from other universities, reporters, and even students from different schools who wanted to talk to him about his math skills. Harvard had posted a video of his performance online, and it had gone viral. Lucinda had become an overnight sensation. But the attention was starting to feel like a weight on his shoulders. Everywhere he went, people stared at him. Some looked at him with awe. Others with skepticism. There were questions, so many questions. What did he plan to do next? Was he going to write a book? Could he solve world problems? Could he be the next big thing? And then there were the doubts. The whispers about whether a 12-year-old from Harlem could really be the one to change the world of mathematics. He wasn't even enrolled in a real math program. He wasn't part of the academic elite. How could he possibly know what he was talking about? Lysimba had always been used to being underestimated. It wasn't a new feeling. But now, the weight of the expectations began to press in on him. The more people asked, the more he felt like he was standing on the edge of something he wasn't ready for. What if they were right? What if he was just a fluke? It wasn't long before Professor Whitaker reached out to Lysimba. A few days after the lecture, he had sent an email, asking Lysimba to come to his office. When Lysimba walked into the professor's office, he felt an odd mix of nervousness and excitement. The office was just as imposing as the man who occupied it. Bookshelves stacked with textbooks and research papers, a large wooden desk, and walls adorned with awards and degrees. Whitaker sat behind the desk, flipping through a set of papers. He looked up as Lysimba entered, and for the first time, his face softened. "Lysimba," he said, his voice unexpectedly warm. "I wanted to talk to you about yesterday. About what you did." Lysimba didn't know what to say. "What I did?" Whitaker leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What you did was remarkable. You solved a problem I've been working on for years. A problem that has stumped some of the brightest minds in the world. That's not something anyone can do. Not even me." Lysimba shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't that big of a deal. I just—" "Don't downplay it," Whitaker interrupted gently. "What you did was extraordinary. And it wasn't just luck. It was skill. It was a new way of thinking. A way of seeing the problem that none of us had even considered." Lysimba felt a swell of pride in his chest. "Thanks, Professor." Whitaker studied him for a moment, as though weighing something important. "I want you to think about something, Lysimba. I want you to consider what's next for you. I've seen something in you, a kind of genius that doesn't come along often. You have the potential to do something great. But you'll need guidance. You'll need to learn." Lysimba felt his heart race. "I don't know if I'm ready. I mean, I'm just a kid. What if I can't do it? What if I mess up?" Whitaker smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "The only way you'll know is if you try. And I think you'll be surprised at what you're capable of." Lysimba looked up at the professor, his mind racing. This was it. This was the moment. Everything he had dreamed about, everything he had worked for, was right here in front of him. "I'll try," Lysimba said, his voice steady. "I'll do my best." Professor Whitaker nodded. "Good. That's all anyone can ask for." As Lysimba left Whitaker's office, his mind buzzed with 1,000 thoughts. The world had just opened up for him in ways he never could have imagined. But as he walked down the hallway, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to stop here. This was just the beginning. He wasn't just going to solve equations anymore. He was going to change the world. The next few weeks at Harvard were nothing like Lysimba had imagined. When he first arrived at the prestigious university, he thought he would be embraced, celebrated even. After all, how often did they get a 12-year-old prodigy from Harlem? How often did a kid like him get the chance to be part of the elite academic world? But instead of the admiration he expected, Lysimba found himself grappling with an invisible wall, a wall built of assumptions, prejudices, and unspoken rules. The first time he stepped into the common area of the math department, he felt it. The subtle stares, the hushed conversations as students looked at him with curiosity, and sometimes, with disdain. He was a kid. He was black. And he was from Harlem. None of those things seemed to fit in the prestigious halls of Harvard. His classmates, mostly young men and women from wealthy families and elite backgrounds, looked at him with confusion, as if trying to figure out how a kid who didn't fit their mold could possibly belong in their world. The feeling of being out of place weighed on him every single day. One afternoon, Lasimba sat at a desk in the library, his notebook open in front of him. The equations on the page swirled before his eyes, a mix of numbers and symbols he understood better than most people ever would. But today, none of it made sense. He wasn't thinking about the math. He was thinking about the way the other students looked at him. A group of them had passed by his table earlier, whispering to each other. One of them, a tall young man with perfectly pressed clothes, had leaned in toward another student and said something that made Lasimba's stomach churn. "Do you think he really belongs here? I mean, he's just a kid from Harlem. How is he going to keep up with us?" Lasimba had tried to ignore it. He had learned early on that the world would say what it wanted to say. People would judge, they would make assumptions, and they would always find ways to tell him that he wasn't enough. But hearing it said out loud, in that moment, stung in a way he wasn't prepared for. He slammed his notebook shut, the sound loud in the quiet library. Several heads turned toward him, but Lasimba didn't care. He grabbed his bag and stormed out of the library, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't think about this right now. He couldn't let their words get to him. Outside, the cold autumn air hit his face, and Lasimba took a deep breath. He walked around the campus, his footsteps echoing in the silence. It was strange, really. He had dreamed of being here, of standing on this campus, of showing the world what he was capable of. But now that he was here, all he felt was the weight of his own isolation. He stopped at the edge of a large fountain in the center of the quad and sat on the stone edge. The sound of the water splashing filled the air, but it did little to calm the turmoil inside him. What did it matter if he was a math genius if no one wanted to be around him? What did it matter if he had the answers if no one would give him the chance to prove himself? His thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Someone was standing behind him. "You look like you could use a friend." Lasimba turned around to see a young woman standing there. She had short, curly hair and a warm smile. Her clothes weren't as formal as the other students, and she wore a pair of sneakers that seemed a little out of place in the sea of designer shoes. But there was something about her that immediately made Lasimba feel a little less alone. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting down next to him. "I didn't mean to interrupt your thinking. But you looked like you could use someone to talk to." Lasimba was surprised. Most of the students at Harvard didn't go out of their way to talk to people they didn't know. He had learned that much in the short time he'd been here. "I don't need a friend," Lasimba said quietly, looking down at his hands. I'm just trying to figure out if I belong here." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You're here, aren't you? Doesn't that mean you belong?" Lasimba chuckled bitterly. "I don't know. It doesn't feel like it sometimes. People don't look at me the same way they look at the other students. I'm not like them. I'm just a kid from Harlem, trying to prove something." The woman's expression softened, and she nodded. "I get it. I'm not from here, either. I transferred from a small school in the Midwest. I didn't think I belonged here either. But eventually, you start to realize that you don't have to fit into their world. You just have to create your own space." Lasimba looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. "But it's hard. People are always watching, waiting for me to fail." She smiled. "Then don't give them the satisfaction. Show them who you really are. Show them what you're capable of." Lasimba nodded, a small flicker of hope igniting inside him. "Thanks. I didn't think anyone understood." "I understand more than you think," the woman said, standing up. "But listen, you're not alone. We all feel like we don't belong here sometimes. But it doesn't mean we can't make a place for ourselves." She turned to walk away, but Lasimba called out to her. "Hey, what's your name?" She glanced back, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "Maya." "And you?" "Lasimba," he said with a smile. "Thanks, Maya. I needed that." Maya waved as she walked off, leaving Lasimba sitting by the fountain, his thoughts a little less heavy. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt a small sense of belonging. Maybe he didn't need to fit in with everyone else. Maybe, just maybe, he could create his own space in this world. He had already proven he was capable of extraordinary things. Now, all he needed to do was prove that he belonged. Over the next few days, Lasimba threw himself back into his studies. He didn't let the stares or the whispers get to him. He had something bigger to focus on. He had his future, and the future of those who had always been told they didn't belong. The next lecture he attended was about abstract algebra, a topic that had always fascinated him. Professor Whitaker stood in front of the class, explaining concepts that Lasimba had already explored on his own. But today, something was different. Instead of sitting at the back of the room, waiting for the class to end, Lasimba raised his hand. "I think I have an alternative approach to this problem," he said, his voice steady. Professor Whitaker paused, looking at Lasimba with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Go ahead, Lasimba." Lasimba stood up, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on him. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. He was here because he belonged. As he spoke, the equations began to flow from his mind, his hands moving across the chalkboard with ease. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, some impressed, some skeptical. But as he finished explaining his solution, he could see it in their faces, there was no denying it. Lasimba had earned his place. Lasimba's life at Harvard continued to spiral in unexpected directions. His classmates' reactions to his talent had shifted, slowly but surely, from disbelief to admiration. He had earned their respect with his stunning insights into abstract algebra, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world was falling into place. But despite his success in the classroom, Lasimba soon realized that his genius, came with a price. It wasn't just the academic pressure, which was intense enough on its own. Lasimba had always thrived on solving complex problems, but the stakes at Harvard were higher than anything he had ever faced before. Every new discovery, every new equation, was another opportunity to prove himself, and another reason for the eyes of the world to scrutinize his every move. No, the hardest part of being here wasn't the problem sets. It wasn't even the professors who had, for the most part, started treating him like an equal. The hardest part was the isolation. It had been a week since his last encounter with Maya by the fountain. She had been a breath of fresh air in the stifling world of academia, a reminder that there were people here who understood what it felt like to not belong. She was one of the few people who didn't look at him as an anomaly, as a kid who didn't deserve to be here. But despite her support, the feeling of loneliness still lingered like a shadow over him. He had come to Harvard to escape the limitations of his world back in Harlem. To show the world that a kid from his neighborhood could rise above it all, could be more than just a statistic. But what he hadn't expected was how much he would miss the very place he had tried to escape. Harlem wasn't just a backdrop for his struggles, it was his home. It was where people understood him, where his friends and family shared his hopes and dreams, where his identity was shaped by something far deeper than academic success. But here, at Harvard, no one saw him as Lasimba from Harlem. They only saw the prodigy, the child genius. And in many ways, it was isolating. He found himself yearning for the familiar sound of his mom's voice as she argued with the neighbors or the laughter of his friends as they joked around on the corner. It was strange how the place that had once felt so limiting now felt like his anchor. Lasimba walked the campus, his head buried in a book as usual. He was on his way to another lecture when he spotted Maya sitting on a bench near the library, staring at her phone. She looked up as he approached, and a warm smile spread across her face. "Hey, Lasimba," she called, waving him over. "What's up?" "Hey," Lasimba said, dropping down onto the bench beside her. "I was just thinking about how much I miss home." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Home? You mean Harlem?" Lasimba nodded, his gaze drifting off toward the ivy-covered buildings in the distance. "Yeah. It feels like no matter how much I try to be here, I can't escape where I'm from." And sometimes I wonder if they're right. If I don't belong here. Maya's smile faded, and she shifted slightly to face him. I get that, she said, her voice soft. You're not the only one who feels like an outsider here. But you're not trying to be anyone else, right? You're here because you're you. And that's what matters. Lusimba gave a half-hearted smile. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I'm more than just me. Like I'm carrying this whole weight on my shoulders. Like everyone expects something from me now. Maya looked thoughtful for a moment. That's the thing, though. You're not just a kid from Harlem. You're Lusimba, and you've got something special. People expect things from you, yes. But that's because they see your potential. The question is, do you see it? Lusimba didn't answer right away. He had heard that question before. From his mom, from Professor Whitaker, even from the students who looked at him with awe and skepticism. But the truth was, he wasn't sure he believed it. Yes, he was capable of incredible things. Yes, he had solved problems no one else could. But that didn't change the fact that every day, he felt like an imposter. The days that followed were a blur of math problems, lectures, and increasing loneliness. Lusimba buried himself in his work, hoping it would take his mind off everything else. He would stay up late into the night, scribbling equations on paper, as if the answers to all his questions were hidden somewhere in the numbers. But the weight of the world was getting heavier. One evening, after a particularly grueling problem set, Lusimba stood in front of the mirror in his dorm room. His face looked pale, his eyes tired. The pressure was beginning to show. He was no longer the wide-eyed kid who had been excited to solve problems. Now, he was a 12-year-old under a microscope, a boy who had become a symbol, a representation of something much bigger than himself. And the worst part? The worst part was that he didn't know how to escape it. There was no going back to Harlem, not now, not after everything he had accomplished. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't welcome here. Not really. Lusimba's phone buzzed on his desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from his mom. He smiled faintly as he read her message, "How's everything going, baby? Remember, don't let anyone make you feel small. You're doing great. I'm proud of you." He stared at the words for a long time, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. His mom had always been his biggest supporter. She believed in him when no one else did. But was he letting her down? Was he really capable of being the person she thought he was? With a deep sigh, Lusimba sat down on his bed, his head in his hands. It was all too much. The next day, he skipped his morning lecture. Instead of going to class, Lusimba walked to a quiet park near the edge of the campus, a place where he could think without the prying eyes of Harvard students on him. The cool autumn air felt refreshing against his skin, and for the first time in days, he let himself breathe without the weight of expectations pressing down on him. He sat on a bench by the pond, watching the ducks swim lazily in the water. It was strange, this place, this campus, it felt like a different world entirely. A world where he wasn't sure if he fit. He had proven that he was smart, but was that enough? Was it enough to simply be smart, or did he need something more? As the thoughts swirled in his mind, Lusimba realized something. He couldn't keep running from his past, from his identity, from the place that had shaped him. He couldn't pretend to be someone he wasn't just to fit in. If he was going to survive here, he had to do it on his own terms. He had to accept that the price of his genius was not just fame and admiration, it was also the struggle to stay true to who he was, even when everything around him wanted to pull him in a different direction. Lusimba took a deep breath, feeling the resolve build inside him. He was more than just his talent. He was more than just a kid from Harlem. He was Lusimba, and he was going to find his place in this world, no matter what it took. The days began to blur together for Lusimba as he pushed through the emotional and academic challenges at Harvard. There were moments when he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but with each passing day, something inside him shifted. He was no longer content to just survive here, he wanted to thrive. But thriving meant overcoming the constant barrage of expectations that surrounded him. Everyone, from his professors to his classmates, seemed to think they had a clear picture of who he was, what he should be, and what he could accomplish. Lysimba was the young prodigy, the Harvard wunderkind, the kid from Harlem who made it to the Ivy League. These labels, while often flattering, felt suffocating. They defined him in ways he hadn't chosen, and they boxed him into a role he wasn't sure he wanted to play. Lysimba's mind kept circling back to the conversation he had had with Maya in the park. You don't have to fit into their world, she had told him. You just have to create your own space. It had been hard to let go of the idea of fitting in. The idea of being accepted by everyone around him. But as the weeks wore on, Lysimba realized that the only person he needed to accept him was himself. And if he couldn't live up to the expectations others placed on him, then it was time to set his own. One cold Friday morning, as Lysimba sat in the campus cafe, his phone buzzed on the table in front of him. He didn't need to look at the screen to know it was another text from his mom. He had been getting them regularly, small check-ins, reminders of how proud she was, and how much she believed in him. Good luck with your presentation today, baby. I'm rooting for you. Lysimba smiled softly. His mom was his rock. She had been the one person who never wavered in her belief in him, even when the world around him had doubted his potential. The text was a reminder of what he had to face, his upcoming presentation in Professor Whitaker's advanced mathematics class. It was a big deal, a chance for him to showcase his understanding of a particularly complex theorem that had stumped even some of the brightest minds at Harvard. The class was notorious for its high expectations, and Professor Whitaker, although impressed by Lysimba's talent, had been pushing him harder than anyone else. The pressure was immense. Lysimba stood up, taking a deep breath as he gathered his notes. He had always prided himself on his ability to rise to the occasion. But today, it felt different. The pressure wasn't just coming from the professors, it was coming from inside himself. He walked toward the lecture hall, his mind racing with doubts. Would he be able to explain the theorem in a way that made sense? Would his classmates finally see him as more than just a curiosity? Or would they continue to view him as the kid who didn't belong? As he entered the classroom, Lysimba felt the familiar stares of his classmates. Their eyes followed him as he made his way to the front of the room. Some were curious, some were impressed, and some were just waiting for him to stumble. Lysimba had seen it all before. But today, he wasn't going to let their expectations control him. Professor Whitaker stood by the chalkboard, his arms crossed as he waited for Lysimba to begin. The older man had been supportive but firm, constantly challenging Lysimba to push beyond what he thought were his limits. Whenever you're ready, Lysimba, Professor Whitaker said, his voice calm but expectant. Lysimba nodded, placing his notes on the podium. He took a deep breath, looking out at the class. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was performing for them. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was here to explain something that mattered to him. This was his moment to speak in his own voice. He turned to the chalkboard and began writing out the complex equations that formed the basis of the theorem. His hands moved with confidence, and as the numbers filled the board, the tension in the room seemed to melt away. Lysimba wasn't just solving equations. He was telling a story of how these abstract numbers connected to real-world ideas, how they could change the way people understood the universe. As he continued explaining the theorem, Lysimba felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. The classroom was silent, the only sound the scratch of chalk against the board. He wasn't being judged. He wasn't being watched for his age or his background. He was simply a mathematician, doing what he loved. When he finished, he turned back to face the class. The room was still, the students staring at him with a mix of awe and surprise. For a moment, Lysimba wasn't sure what to expect. But then, Professor Whitaker's voice broke the silence. Well done, Lysimba. You've cracked it, he said, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This is the kind of work we expect from our brightest minds. The class erupted into applause, and Lasimba couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. He had done it. Not for the approval of others, but for himself. That afternoon, as Lasimba walked back to his dorm, his mind was racing. The presentation had gone better than he could have hoped for. He had done it on his own terms, explaining the theorem in a way that felt natural, without the fear of judgment clouding his thoughts. And for the first time since arriving at Harvard, he felt like he had truly found his place. But the feeling of accomplishment was fleeting. Lasimba had no time to bask in his success. There was always another test, another paper, another problem to solve. And as much as he had grown to love the work, the relentless pressure weighed on him. That evening, as he sat at his desk, his phone buzzed again. It was Maya. "Hey, how did it go today? I heard you killed it in class." Lasimba smiled as he read the message. He quickly typed a reply. "It went well. I finally felt like I was speaking my own language, you know. I'm proud of you. I know you've been struggling with feeling like you don't belong, but you're doing great. You've earned your place here." Lasimba leaned back in his chair, looking out the window. The campus was quiet, the lights from the surrounding buildings casting a soft glow across the courtyard. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe he didn't need to prove himself to anyone but himself. But even as he embraced this small victory, Lasimba knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The pressure wouldn't stop. Expectations would continue to grow, and he would need to find a way to rise above them, to stay true to who he was and what he believed in, even when the weight of the world threatened to crush him. For now, though, Lasimba allowed himself a moment of peace. He had done something for himself today, and that, he realized, was all that mattered. Lasimba stood at the window of his dorm room, his gaze lost in the busy streets below. The world outside was alive with movement, the students rushing to and fro, the professors hurrying to their next lecture, the crisp fall leaves swirling in the wind. It was a world he had worked so hard to enter, but as he watched, it felt distant, almost foreign to him. There were moments when the weight of Harvard's expectations threatened to crush him, when the pressure to succeed seemed unbearable. And in those moments, his thoughts would always drift back to Harlem. It was late one Saturday afternoon when Lasimba received a call from his mom. He hadn't heard from her in a few days, and her voice always brought him a sense of calm, a feeling of connection to the world he had left behind. "Hey, baby," his mom's voice crackled through the phone, warm and familiar. "How's everything going up there in the big city? I saw some pictures of you online. Looks like you're fitting in just fine." Lasimba smiled softly, leaning back in his chair. "It's going well, Mom. It's a lot, you know. The work, the people, everything. It's different than what I expected." His mom chuckled. "I'm sure it is. But I know you can handle it. You've always been a fighter, Lasimba. You just have to remember who you are. Don't let anyone make you feel small, no matter how big they are." Lasimba closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had been hearing that phrase for years, "Don't let anyone make you feel small." His mom had said it when he was younger, back in Harlem, when people doubted him because of where he came from. It was a lesson he had carried with him his whole life. But here, in the shadow of Harvard's ivy-covered walls, it felt harder to believe. "You're right," Lasimba said, his voice quiet. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I don't fit here. I don't know how to explain it." "Listen, baby," his mom replied, her voice steady. "You don't need to fit into their world. You make your own. Just keep your head up, and keep working hard. But don't forget about the people who love you, the people who've been there for you. They're always going to be your foundation. And remember, no matter how far away you are, Harlem's always going to be home." Lasimba paused, his heart tightening. Harlem. It had always been more than just a place, it was where he had grown up, where his dreams had been nurtured, where his identity had been shaped. The streets, the neighbors, the sounds of the city, it was all a part of him, and yet, here, at Harvard, it felt like it was slipping away. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss home. I miss you." "I miss you too, baby," his mom said, her voice full of love. "But you're doing great things up there. Don't forget that. And when you get a chance, come home for a weekend. I'll make your favorite dinner, and we can catch up." Lucinda smiled, a bittersweet feeling washing over him. "I'll come home soon, I promise." After the call ended, Lucinda sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of his mom's words echoing in his mind. Home. Harlem. It felt like both a comfort and a burden. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that no matter how much he tried to distance himself from his past, it would always be there, a part of his story. The question was, could he reconcile the boy from Harlem with the genius Harvard had come to see him as? The next few days passed in a blur of lectures and assignments. Lucinda threw himself into his work, using the challenges of the classroom as a way to distract himself from the gnawing feeling that had taken root in his chest. He felt torn between two worlds, the world he had left behind and the world he was trying to build. But no matter how many equations he solved, no matter how many groundbreaking insights he had in class, Lucinda couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't just the work or the academic pressure. It was the sense of belonging, the feeling that he was truly seen and understood. Maya had been right when she told him he didn't have to fit into their world. But now, Lucinda realized, he had to figure out how to make his own world, one that bridged the gap between his past and his future. It was one evening, as Lucinda sat in the library, his eyes scanning over a set of notes for his next lecture, that the decision finally clicked. He had been avoiding it, pushing it aside, thinking it was a sign of weakness, but the truth was undeniable, he needed to go home. Harvard was a world of endless possibilities, but it was also a world that seemed to demand a sacrifice. The more Lucinda tried to fit in, the more he felt like he was losing himself in the process. He needed to reconnect with who he was, with the people who had shaped him, and with the place that had always been his anchor. He knew he couldn't stay in Harvard's bubble forever. As much as he loved math, as much as he thrived on solving problems and finding answers, he couldn't do it without remembering where he came from. He couldn't let his genius define him at the cost of his soul. Lucinda booked a ticket for the following weekend to return to Harlem. The thought of going home filled him with both excitement and nervousness. What would it be like? Would everything feel the same, or would it feel different now that he had been to Harvard, had tasted success in a world so different from his own? He spent the rest of the week in a blur of emotions, preparing for his trip, but even as he packed his bags, part of him wasn't sure what to expect. Home was calling to him, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the changes that had come with his time away. The night before his flight, Lucinda stood once again at the window of his dorm room, staring out at the campus. The lights from the buildings below twinkled in the distance, but to Lucinda, they felt distant. He longed for the sounds of Harlem, the music from the street vendors, the conversations between neighbors, the rhythm of life that had shaped him. Harvard had given him a world of opportunity, but it hadn't given him the answers he needed. Only home could do that. The next morning, Lucinda boarded a plane back to New York. As the plane lifted off the ground, Lucinda leaned back in his seat, his thoughts drifting back to Harlem. To the life he had once known, and to the life he was still trying to build. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, Lucinda felt a sense of clarity. No matter where his journey took him, he would always carry Harlem with him. It was part of him, just as he was a part of it. And that, he realized, was the foundation he needed to keep moving forward. He was going home, not just to visit, but to reconnect with the roots that had always grounded him. To remind himself who he was and why he started this journey in the first place. And as the plane soared higher into the sky, Lucinda closed his eyes, knowing that whatever came next, he would face it as Lucinda, the boy from Harlem, the mathematician, and, most importantly, the person he had always been meant to be. Lysimba stepped off the plane at LaGuardia Airport, feeling a rush of nostalgia as the cool air of New York hit his face. The familiar hum of the city was in the air, the hustle, the energy, the life. It felt like the heartbeat of the world. For a moment, he just stood there, taking it all in. The city had changed in subtle ways, but the core of it was still the same, the vibrant streets, the constant movement, the people who never seemed to stop moving. It felt good to be home. He grabbed his bag and headed toward the exit, where his mom was waiting for him. The moment their eyes met, she smiled, and it was like nothing had changed. Her presence was a comfort, grounding him, reminding him of everything he had left behind and everything he had worked for. "Lysimba," she called, her arms wide as she approached. "Look at you, all grown up. You've been gone for too long." Lysimba smiled and hugged her tightly. The warmth of her embrace made him feel like a child again, safe and cared for. In that moment, the pressures of Harvard, the expectations, the struggles, it all melted away. "I've missed you, Mom," Lysimba said, pulling back from the hug but still holding her hand. "I've missed you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "How's school? How's everything at Harvard?" It's been a lot," Lysimba said, trying to find the right words. "But it's also been eye-opening. I'm learning a lot, but sometimes it feels like I'm losing myself in all of it." His mom nodded, understanding without needing an explanation. "I can imagine. But you're strong, Lysimba. You've always been strong. Whatever you're facing, I know you'll make it through. Just don't forget where you come from. And don't forget about the people who love you." Lysimba felt a lump form in his throat at her words. His mom was always so steady, so unwavering in her belief in him. It was one of the reasons he had pushed himself so hard to succeed, because he didn't want to let her down. But now, standing in front of her, he realized that he had been so focused on pleasing everyone else, his professors, his classmates, even himself, that he had lost touch with the very foundation that had shaped him. They made their way to the car, and as they drove through the streets of Harlem, Lysimba couldn't help but feel the pull of the neighborhood. The streets were alive with activity, the music from the street vendors blending with the laughter of children playing in the park, the sounds of life that had once been his world. It was a rhythm he knew by heart, one that had shaped him in ways he was just beginning to understand. When they arrived home, Lysimba was greeted by the familiar sights of his old neighborhood. The corner store, the barber shop, the school he had attended, it was all there, just as he remembered it. But something had changed. As he stood on the doorstep of his old house, a sense of unease settled in his chest. The world around him had grown, had evolved, but so had he. And now, standing here, it felt like he was caught between two worlds, Harvard and Harlem, the future and the past. Inside the house, his mom had already started preparing his favorite meal, fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, and macaroni and cheese. The smell of it filled the air, and Lysimba felt a deep sense of comfort. This was home. This was where his journey had started, where his dreams had first taken root. As they sat down to eat, Lysimba's mind wandered back to his time at Harvard. The late nights spent in the library, the feeling of being constantly watched, the pressure to prove himself. But at the same time, there had been moments of triumph, moments when he had felt like he belonged. But still, something was missing. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling that he was living in two different worlds, that the person he was becoming wasn't entirely the person he had been. "Mom, I've been thinking," Lysimba said, breaking the silence. "Harvard is amazing, but it's also overwhelming. I feel like I'm losing myself there, like I'm not sure where I fit in anymore. I love the work, but there's something about it that doesn't feel right." His mom looked at him, her eyes soft but knowing. "Lysimba, you're allowed to feel that way. You've been given an incredible opportunity, but that doesn't mean you have to change who you are. You don't have to let that place define you. What matters is that you stay true to yourself." Lysimba nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He didn't have to lose himself to succeed. He had been so focused on fitting into Harvard's world that he had forgotten about the world that had shaped him. Harlem had always been a part of him, and he couldn't just leave it behind. Later that evening, Lucinda decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The city was alive with energy, the streetlights casting a warm glow over the sidewalks. As he walked, he found himself retracing the steps of his childhood, passing the corner store where he used to buy candy, the park where he played basketball with his friends, the church where his mom had taken him every Sunday. He couldn't help but smile as memories flooded back, the laughter, the struggles, the sense of community. Harlem was more than just a place. It was a part of him, a part of his identity that he couldn't just erase, no matter how far he went or how much success he found. As Lucinda walked, he realized something important: he didn't need to choose between Harvard and Harlem. He didn't need to let one define him. He could take both with him, integrating the lessons from each world into his life. Harvard had given him a platform to grow, but Harlem had given him his foundation. The two could coexist, and it was up to him to find a way to balance both. The next morning, Lucinda sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as he thought about the future. His visit home had given him clarity. He knew now that he didn't have to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to be the perfect student or the perfect prodigy. He just needed to be himself, to embrace the parts of him that had made him who he was. As his mom entered the room, Lucinda smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but now he knew that he didn't have to do it alone. He had his family, his community, and his roots to keep him grounded. And with that, Lucinda knew one thing for certain: no matter where life took him, Harlem would always be home. The week following his return to Harlem felt like a dream, so much of it was a blur of laughter, old friends, and family dinners. But despite the comfort of being home, Lucinda couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted. Harvard had been everything he had ever worked for, but in the days since he'd been back, it was clearer than ever that there was more to his journey than just academic success. He had to forge a path that was uniquely his, one that integrated everything he had learned while never losing sight of where he came from. He sat in his mom's kitchen one crisp morning, sipping the cup of coffee she had made for him. The steam swirled up, carrying with it the scent of his favorite breakfast: sausage, eggs, and grits. It was one of those mornings that felt like everything had aligned just right. "You seem deep in thought," his mom said, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she gave him a curious look. Lucinda chuckled softly. "I guess I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About what comes next. What I want to do with all this opportunity. I don't want to lose myself in it." His mom set down the dish towel and walked over to him, sitting across the table. Her gaze softened as she looked at him, her voice steady. "Lucinda, you've always been someone who thinks ahead, who dreams big. That's why you got into Harvard. But don't forget that your heart is what will guide you. If you lose that, you'll lose everything." Lucinda nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. It wasn't just about being brilliant, it was about staying true to who he was, remembering where he came from and how his community had shaped him. He had always believed that his intellect would be his ticket out of Harlem, but now he saw it differently. His gift wasn't just for him, it was for the people who had been there for him from the start. "I don't want to disappoint anyone," Lucinda said softly, more to himself than to his mom. "Harvard, all the people who believed in me, they see me as someone who's destined for greatness. But what if greatness means something different? What if it's about giving back?" His mom smiled, reaching across the table to place her hand on his. "You're a special young man, Lucinda. And you've got so much to offer. But greatness doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes, it's about lifting others up, about using what you have to help your community." That was it. The weight that had been pressing on him for so long suddenly lifted. He had been so focused on fitting into Harvard's world that he had forgotten why he was there in the first place: to make a difference. His education wasn't just for himself, it was for everyone who had helped him get there. He had always said that Harlem shaped him, but now he realized it was time to give back in a way that mattered. Later that day, Lusimba met with Maya at a local cafe in Harlem. She had been one of his closest friends back when he was growing up, and over the years, they'd kept in touch, even when his life at Harvard pulled him away. Maya had always been a voice of reason, someone who understood the balance he was trying to strike between his roots and his future. Lusimba, Maya greeted him with a warm hug as he sat down across from her. "It's so good to see you. I'm glad you came back home." "It's been great," Lusimba said with a smile. "But I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next. About where I want to take my life." Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh yeah? What's on your mind?" "I don't want to just be some Harvard success story. I don't want my achievements to be about leaving Harlem behind. I want to take what I've learned and use it to help the people who helped me get here in the first place. I'm thinking about going back to school, but I want to focus on ways to give back, maybe work on community development or education. Something that allows me to use my talents to build Harlem, to give the next generation the same chance I had." Maya's eyes lit up. "Lusimba, that's amazing. I think you're onto something. Harlem needs people like you. You could make such an impact, not just on the people here, but on the whole city." Lusimba felt a surge of excitement at the thought. He had spent so much time trying to fit into a world that wasn't his own, and now, sitting here with Maya, he realized that he could create his own world. One where success didn't mean abandoning his roots. He could be the bridge between the academic world of Harvard and the community he loved, helping both sides understand each other and grow together. The rest of the day passed quickly as Lusimba continued to catch up with old friends and family. He visited his old school and met with his former teachers, who had always believed in him, even when others doubted his potential. The faces that greeted him were familiar, warm, and full of pride. But there was a new sense of determination in Lusimba's heart. The more he thought about his future, the more he realized that he couldn't ignore his purpose. Back at his mom's house that evening, Lusimba sat with his laptop open, researching ways to combine his passion for education, his talents in mathematics, and his love for Harlem into something impactful. He wanted to create a program that would help young people in Harlem learn, grow, and access the same resources he had been given. A program that could provide mentorship, resources, and scholarships for students who had the potential but lacked the opportunities. As the night wore on, Lusimba worked tirelessly, drafting ideas and proposals. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, financial hurdles, logistical problems, the skepticism of others, but for the first time in a long while, Lusimba felt a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just building a career. He was building a legacy. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over Harlem, Lusimba sat on the balcony of his mom's apartment, looking out at the familiar skyline. The neighborhood was just waking up, the street vendors starting to set up shop, the sound of early morning traffic humming in the background. He took a deep breath and smiled. It felt right. He had a plan now, a vision for the future that wasn't just about his success. It was about the people who had always been there for him, the community that had shaped him. He was ready to step into a new role, one that was bigger than any classroom or lecture hall. A role that would allow him to be both a student and a teacher, someone who would continue to learn while giving back. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Lusimba knew one thing for sure: he wasn't walking it alone. He had Harlem by his side. And that, he realized, was the most powerful thing he could have. The sun had barely risen when Lusimba made his way to the community center in Harlem. His mind was racing with excitement and nerves, a combination that kept him up the night before. He had spent the last few days refining his idea, a program designed to provide academic support, mentorship, and resources to Harlem's youth. A program that, in time, would create opportunities for students who, like him, had the potential but not always the access. It was the kind of program he wished he'd had when he was younger, one that could have helped him navigate the tough world of education with a little more confidence, a little more support. He arrived at the center early, just as the first workers were starting their shifts. The place was familiar, and yet there was something new about it today. It felt like the beginning of something bigger. As he approached the doors, Lasimba felt a flutter in his chest. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the moment where everything could change. It was his chance to step up, to bring the vision he had been nurturing to life. Inside the community center, he was greeted by Ms. Johnson, the director. She was a tall, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had been running the center for as long as Lasimba could remember. She had been there for him during his younger years, guiding him through challenges and always pushing him to do better. Her stern demeanor softened when she saw him, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Lasimba. It's so good to see you," Ms. Johnson said, giving him a warm hug. "I heard you were coming by. What's all this I hear about you wanting to start a program?" Lasimba smiled, his nerves slowly fading as he saw the familiar face of someone who had always believed in him. "I've been thinking a lot lately, Ms. Johnson. I want to do something for the kids here. I want to create a program that can help them with schoolwork, give them access to mentors, and connect them with the resources they need to succeed." Ms. Johnson's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what Harlem needs. What do you have in mind?" He took a deep breath and pulled out his notebook, where he had outlined his ideas over the past few days. "I've been working on this idea for a while. It's going to be called Harlem Scholars, and the goal is to create a space where kids can get academic help, but also mentorship from people who look like them, people who've been through what they're going through. It's not just about grades. It's about giving them the tools to succeed in life." Lasimba explained the details of the program: after-school tutoring sessions, college prep workshops, mentorship by professionals from various fields, and scholarships for students who needed financial assistance to attend college. He wanted the program to be holistic, focusing on personal growth as much as academic achievement. As he spoke, Ms. Johnson's face softened, and her expression grew more thoughtful. She nodded slowly, clearly impressed with the thought and care that Lasimba had put into his plan. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need here," she said. "But you know how it is, Lasimba. Funding, resources, volunteers, it's all going to be a challenge. It's going to take a lot of work." Lasimba nodded, fully aware of the obstacles ahead. "I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I've seen what's possible when we get the right people together, and I know we can make this happen. I'm not asking for a lot, I just want to get started and build it from there." Ms. Johnson placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that felt like a seal of approval. "You've always been one to think big. But you've also always backed it up with action. I believe in you, Lasimba. If anyone can make this work, it's you." Lasimba felt a surge of confidence. This was just the beginning, but it was the most important first step. With Ms. Johnson's support, he knew he could begin laying the foundation for the Harlem Scholars program. He had no illusions about how difficult it would be. There would be plenty of setbacks, plenty of people who doubted him, but he was ready. He had the passion, and he had the vision. More importantly, he had the community. The next week was a whirlwind. Lasimba spent every waking hour coordinating meetings with local leaders, teachers, and business owners who could help bring the program to life. He met with potential donors, pitched his idea to organizations that supported educational initiatives, and reached out to volunteers who could assist with tutoring and mentorship. It wasn't easy. The first few days were filled with rejection. Some people didn't think a program like Harlem Scholars was feasible. Others were skeptical that a 19-year-old kid from Harlem could pull off something so ambitious. But Lasimba refused to be deterred. He kept pushing forward, refining his pitch, getting better at answering tough questions, and learning from every meeting. The breakthrough came when he met with an old mentor, Dr. Randall Brooks, a former professor who had helped Lasimba get into Harvard. Dr. Brooks had deep connections in the education sector, and Lasimba hoped he could offer advice, or at the very least, some direction. "I've been thinking about you, Lysimba," Dr. Brooks said after hearing about the Harlem Scholars Program. "You've got something special here, but it's going to need more than just heart. You'll need a solid plan and a clear understanding of how to run a program like this. I'll help you get it started, but you've got to commit to the hard work. No shortcuts." Lysimba nodded eagerly. "I'm all in, Dr. Brooks. I want this to work." "Well then, let's make it happen, Dr. Brooks said with a smile. "I've got a few contacts who might be able to help with funding and resources. Let's get this off the ground." With Dr. Brooks's help, Lysimba secured initial funding from a local nonprofit and a couple of private donors who believed in his vision. The first piece of the puzzle was in place. The grand launch of the Harlem Scholars Program was scheduled for the following month. Lysimba's heart raced as he worked around the clock to ensure everything was ready. He enlisted the help of local teachers, older students, and even a few alumni from his own high school to volunteer their time. He had always been a dreamer, but now he was turning his dreams into reality, one small step at a time. The night before the launch, Lysimba sat on the roof of his mom's apartment building, looking out over Harlem. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, and the streets below were bustling with life. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything on his shoulders. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt a sense of calm. This was where he was meant to be, here, with his people, making a difference. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new. Something that could change the lives of so many kids. And Lysimba was ready. The day had arrived. Harlem Scholars was officially launching. Lysimba stood outside the community center, his nerves bubbling with excitement and anticipation. He had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, talking to mentors, securing donations, organizing volunteers, but now, it was real. There was no turning back. The sun was just beginning to rise over the skyline, casting a golden glow over the streets of Harlem. People were already starting their day, heading to work, grabbing their morning coffee, or stopping to chat with neighbors. It was a familiar sight, but today, everything felt different. There was an energy in the air, something that Lysimba couldn't quite put into words. It was the feeling of something new being born, something that had the potential to change the future of Harlem forever. As he entered the community center, the sounds of excited chatter and laughter filled the air. Students, parents, volunteers, and teachers were all gathered in the main hall, ready to kick off the first day of the Harlem Scholars Program. Lysimba took a deep breath, smiling to himself as he watched the people he had worked so hard to bring together come to life. Ms. Johnson was already there, greeting everyone with her usual warm yet authoritative presence. She caught sight of Lysimba and waved him over. "You made it," she said with a wide grin. "The place is buzzing. I think it's going to be a great day." Lysimba chuckled nervously. "I hope so. I just want it all to go smoothly. I don't want to disappoint anyone. You've already done more than most people ever would. Now, let's just focus on today. One step at a time." With a final nod, Lysimba made his way toward the main hall. As he entered, the room fell silent for a moment, and all eyes turned to him. The students, many of whom were in their early teens, looked at him with a mix of curiosity and excitement. There were also parents and local community leaders in the room, some of whom had supported the program and were now there to see how it would unfold. Lysimba stepped to the front of the room and cleared his throat, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. His heart pounded in his chest, but he pushed through the nerves. He had always been good at speaking, at commanding a room, but this was different. This wasn't a classroom at Harvard. This was his home. These were his people. "Good morning, everyone," Lysimba began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I want to thank you all for being here today. Harlem Scholars is not just a program, it's a community. It's about lifting each other up, about showing that no matter where you come from, you have the power to shape your own future." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, and Lasimba could feel the energy shifting. It was like the room was with him, rooting for him. He smiled and continued. We're here to learn, yes. But we're also here to give back. To support one another. I'm not here just to teach, I'm here to learn from all of you, too. So, let's make this a space where we can grow together. As Lasimba spoke, he saw the students' faces light up. It was as if his words were speaking directly to them, words they had been waiting to hear for a long time. He could see the hope in their eyes, the desire to be part of something bigger than themselves. It wasn't just about academics, it was about finding purpose, finding community. When Lasimba finished his speech, there was a round of applause. The energy in the room shifted from anticipation to action. He smiled and motioned to the volunteers, who began ushering the students into different activity groups. The day's schedule was packed with workshops, tutoring sessions, and team-building exercises. Lasimba had planned everything meticulously, but nothing could have prepared him for the challenges that would arise throughout the day. The first lesson didn't go as smoothly as he had hoped. Lasimba had divided the students into small groups, each with a volunteer mentor who would help guide them through a math problem-solving exercise. The goal was simple, each student had to work through a set of problems, but the twist was that they could only collaborate with their group, not with their peers outside of it. This would test not only their academic skills but also their ability to work together and communicate effectively. At first, everything seemed to go well. The students were engaged, and the volunteers were patient, helping the younger kids who struggled with the problems. But then, in one group, things took a turn. A student named Tyrell, a quiet 13-year-old with a reputation for being tough, seemed frustrated. He was sitting in the corner, arms crossed, staring at the math problems with a scowl on his face. Lasimba approached him cautiously, kneeling down beside him. "Hey, Tyrell, how's it going? You stuck?" Tyrell didn't look up. "This is dumb. I don't get it. None of this stuff even matters. I'm not gonna be a doctor or anything." Lasimba's heart sank. He had been expecting some resistance, but not like this. He had heard about Tyrell's troubled past, the difficulties he had faced growing up in Harlem, but this was different. Tyrell wasn't just frustrated, he was disengaged. And that was a problem. Lasimba sat down next to him. "I get it, Tyrell. This stuff might not seem important now, but what you're learning here is more than just math. It's about problem solving. It's about learning how to work through challenges, even when they seem impossible. And you're good at this, I can see it. You've got potential." Tyrell looked at him skeptically. "I'm not good at anything." "You are," Lasimba insisted. "You just have to believe that." It took a few moments, but Tyrell finally looked down at his worksheet. Lasimba didn't push him too hard. Instead, he let the silence sit between them, letting Tyrell process the moment in his own way. Slowly, the scowl began to fade. Tyrell picked up his pencil, hesitated, and then started solving the first problem. It wasn't a huge breakthrough, but it was progress. Lasimba smiled to himself and moved on, checking in with other groups, offering guidance where needed. The day continued, with moments of success and moments of struggle. By the end of the session, Lasimba felt a mix of exhaustion and accomplishment. He had seen firsthand how much work was involved in running this program, but he had also seen the potential. It wasn't just about teaching them math or English, it was about giving these kids the belief that they could do more, that they could achieve more. And that was what Harlem Scholars was all about. As the students filed out of the room at the end of the day, there was a noticeable difference in the energy. They were talking, laughing, and even asking questions about the next session. The program wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Lasimba, that was all that mattered. Later that night, as he sat in his room, reflecting on the day, Lasimba felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had made it through the first day, and despite the challenges, it had been a success. But more than that, he had learned something important. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be setbacks, there would be frustrations, but he was in it for the long haul. He was committed to these kids, to his community, and to the idea that no dream was too big if you had the right support. Harlem Scholars was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The second week of the Harlem Scholars program brought its own set of challenges. Lucinda had prepared for the lessons, for the kids, and for the volunteers, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the logistical issues that came to light. There were problems with the space, supplies, and even the technology that was supposed to make the program run smoothly. The projector that was meant to show a motivational video on the first day, it malfunctioned. The computer lab had a shortage of working computers. There wasn't enough seating in the classrooms. In short, there were a million tiny issues that seemed to crop up every single day. Lucinda was used to working through problems, but the sheer volume of them was beginning to wear on him. After the second day of dealing with technical difficulties, he collapsed onto a bench in the community center's lobby, his head in his hands. "Lucinda, are you okay?" Ms. Johnson's voice cut through his thoughts. She had a concerned look on her face, though her tone remained calm and composed. He glanced up, forcing a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm good. Just, a lot going on. You ever feel like no matter how hard you work, there's always something else that goes wrong?" Ms. Johnson chuckled softly and sat down beside him. "Oh, trust me, I know exactly how that feels. I've been running this center for years, and things still go wrong all the time. But here's the thing, every problem is an opportunity to figure out how to do things better. And you've already done something amazing. This program exists because of your vision. You've got the right heart, Lucinda. Don't let the small stuff get you down." Lucinda leaned back against the bench, letting out a slow breath. He knew Ms. Johnson was right. He had built something out of nothing, something that could make a real difference in the lives of these kids. He couldn't let a few setbacks stand in his way. "I'm trying," he said, glancing around the bustling community center. "But it's hard when you're trying to build something big and everything feels like it's falling apart." Ms. Johnson smiled kindly. "It's never easy. But look at what you've already accomplished. People are showing up. They're here for you. They believe in this program." That was the truth. Volunteers were coming back every day, the kids were engaged, and the parents were starting to talk positively about the impact of the program. Lucinda had worked hard to get here, and while it wasn't perfect, it was working. But there was still so much left to do. So many lessons to teach, so many kids to help. Harlem Scholars needed more than just heart, it needed stability. It needed organization. And that was where Lucinda's real challenge lay, how to keep building momentum when there were so many hurdles to jump over. By the end of the week, things were starting to stabilize. Lucinda had worked with his team of volunteers to patch up the issues with the technology. They made a deal with a local business to donate new computers and upgrade the outdated ones. Volunteers helped reorganize the space to create more room for classes. Little by little, the program was beginning to feel like a well-oiled machine. But even as the logistical problems started to iron themselves out, Lucinda felt a growing weight on his shoulders. The expectations were higher now. Harlem Scholars wasn't just a hopeful idea anymore. It was real. And it was growing. One afternoon, Lucinda was walking down 125th Street when he ran into an old classmate from high school, Kayla. She had been a year ahead of him, smart, ambitious, and always one of the more popular students at their high school. They had shared a few classes together, but their paths had diverged after graduation. Lucinda hadn't expected to see her today. "Lucinda. Wow, it's been forever," Kayla said, her eyes lighting up as she spotted him. "How are you? What's going on?" Lucinda smiled. "Hey, Kayla. It's been a while, huh?" "I'm doing well. Actually, I'm running this new program, Harlem Scholars. It's an after-school tutoring and mentorship program for kids here in the neighborhood. Kayla raised her eyebrows in surprise. That's awesome. I didn't know you were doing something like that. I've been working on it for a while now, Lusimba said, a bit of pride creeping into his voice. It's been challenging, but I really believe in it. We're making a difference, you know. Kayla nodded, clearly impressed. That's incredible. I'm sure you're helping a lot of kids. I've been meaning to give back to the community too. I've got a few extra hours in my schedule, I could help with tutoring or mentoring. I mean, if you'd have me. Lusimba's face brightened. That would be amazing. We can definitely use more mentors. We're really focused on getting people involved who can relate to the kids, you know. You'd be a great addition. Kayla smiled and scribbled her number down on a piece of paper, handing it to him. I'm serious. Let me know when you need help. Thanks, Kayla. I'll be in touch. As Lusimba walked away, he felt a renewed sense of hope. He had just gained a valuable volunteer, and more importantly, it was someone who understood the struggles of growing up in Harlem. That kind of connection was vital for the program. But there was still a nagging feeling in the back of his mind, the feeling that no matter how much help he had, he still needed more. Harlem Scholars was growing, and Lusimba couldn't shake the thought that there was something missing. Perhaps it was time to bring in more outside expertise, people who had done this kind of work before, who could help him take the program to the next level. That night, as he sat in his small apartment, going through emails and making plans for the next phase of Harlem Scholars, he received a call that would change everything. Hello. Lusimba, this is Dr. Randall Brooks. Lusimba sat up straight, surprised. Dr. Brooks. How's it going? I've been keeping an eye on the Harlem Scholars program, and I'm impressed with what you've built so far. But I think it's time to take it to the next level. I know a few people who could help with funding and resources, people who can take your program to a larger scale. I want to help. If you're interested, I'd like to meet and discuss how we can make this even bigger than you've imagined. Lusimba's heart raced. This was it. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. I'm definitely interested, Dr. Brooks. Let's meet. I can't wait to hear your ideas. As he hung up the phone, Lusimba felt a rush of excitement. Things were falling into place. Harlem Scholars was no longer just a small community initiative, it was about to become something bigger. Something that could impact the entire city. The momentum had started to build. Lusimba arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, as always. He liked the peace and quiet of the early morning, the brief moment of calm before the world got busy. As he set down his bag and ordered a cup of coffee, his mind raced. The call with Dr. Randall Brooks had been a turning point, one that could change everything. For weeks, Lusimba had been struggling with how to expand Harlem Scholars. Despite the progress, he knew it wasn't enough. He needed more resources, more connections, and more people who understood how to scale a program like this. The door opened, and Dr. Brooks walked in, his tall frame cutting through the crowd. He wore a crisp suit and carried an air of authority, but his smile was warm and inviting. Lusimba stood up to greet him. Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for meeting me today, Lusimba said, shaking his hand firmly. No problem at all, Dr. Brooks replied, settling into the chair across from Lusimba. I've been following your work, Lusimba, and I have to say, I'm impressed. What you're doing here is exactly what Harlem needs. Lusimba felt a surge of pride, but he quickly shifted his focus to the future. I'm glad you think so. But the truth is, I've been hitting some roadblocks. We're growing, but not fast enough. We're at capacity with our space, and we don't have enough funding to really make a long-term impact. We need expertise, people who know how to build sustainable programs. Dr. Brooks nodded thoughtfully, sipping his coffee. I completely understand. That's where I come in. Over the years, I've worked with several programs just like this one. I know the challenges you're facing, and I have a team who can help. But first, let's talk about the vision. What do you want Harlem Scholars to become? Lasimba took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to articulate his dream. I want Harlem Scholars to be more than just an after-school program. I want it to be a community hub, a place where kids can come not just for academic help but for mentorship, for career guidance, for a sense of belonging. I want to create a pipeline, one that helps kids from elementary school through high school, and even college. A place where they can see that their dreams are possible, no matter where they come from. Dr. Brooks smiled, clearly impressed by the clarity in Lasimba's vision. That's exactly the kind of ambition we need. We can help you make that happen. But you're going to need more than just a small team. You're going to need to bring in professionals, people who can handle logistics, grant writing, marketing, fundraising. These are all things you can't do alone. Lasimba felt a knot form in his stomach. He had always prided himself on doing things his way, on being hands-on. He liked the idea of Harlem Scholars being his brainchild, his creation. But the truth was, he was stretched thin. He was working day and night, and it was starting to take a toll on him. I understand, Lasimba said, trying to push past his hesitation. But bringing in professionals means giving up some control, right? I've always been hands-on with this program, and I worry about losing that personal touch. The kids and the volunteers, they rely on me. That's a valid concern, Dr. Brooks agreed. But remember, you're not abandoning the program. You're expanding it. You'll still be the heart of Harlem Scholars, Lasimba. But to reach more kids, to make the kind of impact you want, you'll need a team who can help handle the heavy lifting. And trust me, you're going to need it. Lasimba leaned back in his chair, his mind swirling. It wasn't an easy decision. But if he wanted Harlem Scholars to grow into what he envisioned, he couldn't do it alone. Over the next few weeks, Lasimba worked closely with Dr. Brooks and his team. They helped him identify key areas where the program needed support: financial management, outreach, and curriculum development. They brought in grant writers, social media managers, and community organizers, each of them offering their expertise to help scale the program. The changes were immediate. Harlem Scholars began to attract attention from local businesses, foundations, and even government officials who recognized the potential in what Lasimba had created. Word spread quickly, and soon, donations began pouring in. The program started receiving corporate sponsorships, and they were able to secure a bigger space in the community center. They even had the resources to hire a full-time administrator, someone who could handle the day-to-day logistics, freeing Lasimba up to focus on the vision. But as the program grew, so did the challenges. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and planning, Lasimba found himself sitting in his apartment, staring at a pile of paperwork. His phone buzzed on the table in front of him. It was a text from Kayla. "Hey, I wanted to check in with you about tutoring for the high schoolers. I've been noticing some struggles with the older students, they're starting to lose focus. Do you think we could change up the curriculum a bit to keep them engaged?" Lasimba let out a sigh. The curriculum was one of the things that had been a major focus of the recent expansion efforts. It had been designed to offer a broad range of subjects, but now that the program had grown, it was clear that the older students needed something different. They needed something more relevant to their lives and their futures. Lasimba tapped out a quick reply, "Thanks for bringing this up, Kayla. Let's talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to need to make some adjustments to the curriculum, especially for the high school group. We want to make sure they feel challenged, but also inspired." As he looked at the pile of work in front of him, Lasimba couldn't shake the feeling of being overwhelmed. Harlem Scholars was growing fast, but with that growth came more responsibilities. There were financial reports to approve, new donors to meet, volunteers to coordinate, and curriculum updates to be made. He was no longer just a teacher or a mentor, He was a program director, a fundraiser, and a manager. The weight of it all was beginning to settle heavily on his shoulders. Just then, the door to his apartment creaked open. His younger sister, Amara, stepped inside, her arms full of grocery bags. "You still up, big brother?" she asked, smiling as she unloaded the groceries onto the kitchen counter. "Yeah, I'm just trying to catch up on some things," Lysimba replied, rubbing his temples. "This whole thing is a lot more complicated than I thought." Amara's smile faded slightly, and she walked over to him, sitting down on the couch beside him. "You know, you don't have to do everything yourself. You've got people who want to help, who believe in you. You can lean on them." Lysimba stared at his sister, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't want to let anyone down. This is my dream, Amara. I want to do it right." "I know you do," she said softly. "But you don't have to carry all the weight. Let the team help. It's okay to ask for support." Lysimba nodded, feeling a sense of relief. Maybe it was time to trust in the team he had built. Maybe it was time to let go of the fear of losing control and embrace the growth that was happening. Harlem Scholars could become even greater if he allowed himself to rely on the people around him. The next day, Lysimba called a meeting with the core team. He shared his concerns about the curriculum and his fears of losing sight of the program's original mission. Together, they brainstormed ideas for keeping the high school students engaged, discussing mentorship opportunities, career readiness workshops, and more focused academic support. The group came up with a plan that Lysimba felt good about. That afternoon, Lysimba sat back at his desk, looking out at the city skyline. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. Scaling up Harlem Scholars wasn't easy, but he was learning that it wasn't about doing it all alone. It was about building a team, a community, and trusting in the process. Harlem Scholars wasn't just his dream anymore, it was theirs. The following months felt like a blur. Harlem Scholars had been expanding rapidly, attracting more students, volunteers, and even local businesses eager to help. They had secured a larger space, and Lysimba was able to delegate more responsibilities to his growing team, but something still wasn't sitting right. Despite the success and the praise from the community, there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind that they weren't moving fast enough. The kids needed more. The community needed more. And he couldn't shake the thought that, no matter how much they'd grown, the program still wasn't fully equipped to make the long-term impact he dreamed of. It was a Thursday afternoon when the breakthrough came. Lysimba was sitting in a conference room at the community center with his team, going over the latest quarterly report. They had just received a sizable donation from a corporate sponsor, but it wasn't enough to fill the gaps they still faced. The money was there, but there were still holes in the program, staff shortages, underfunded scholarships, and an inability to offer more resources to the kids who needed them the most. "Lysimba," Kayla spoke up, interrupting his train of thought. "We're doing a lot of things right, but we're still not addressing the biggest issue. We're constantly playing catch-up. We need a sustainable model. We need to be able to count on funding year after year, not just one-time donations. How do we do that?" Lysimba ran his hands through his hair, a deep sense of frustration settling in. He had thought about sustainability many times. He knew it was critical for the long-term success of Harlem Scholars. But the reality was, he hadn't figured out how to make it happen. Every time they got a little ahead, something else came up, new expenses, new needs, more mouths to feed. He couldn't seem to get the balance right. "We need a game plan," he said after a pause, his voice laced with frustration. "Something that's more than just a quick fix. We need an actual strategy to ensure we can continue serving these kids. We need partnerships, a bigger funding base, better outreach." Dr. Brooks, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, spoke up, his voice calm and measured. "Lysimba, I've been talking to a few people who can help with this. They specialize in building long-term partnerships with organizations that fund educational initiatives, and I think they can help take Harlem Scholars to the next level." Lysimba perked up at the mention of new partnerships. Who are these people? And how can they help us? Dr. Brooks smiled, pulling out a stack of business cards from his jacket pocket. He handed them to Lysimba. These are individuals from some of the largest foundations in the country. They're always looking for sustainable, high-impact programs like yours. They're particularly interested in programs that focus on underserved communities, and they understand the importance of building long-term support. Lysimba took the cards, his heart racing. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for, people who understood the value of Harlem Scholars and could help secure the funding they needed to expand and maintain it. This could change everything, Lysimba muttered under his breath. If we can get them on board, we won't have to worry about scrambling for funds every few months. We can build something real. We can, Dr. Brooks agreed. But it's going to take some work. You're going to have to put together a strong proposal, a clear plan for how Harlem Scholars will continue to grow and evolve. These foundations want to see your long-term vision, not just the successes you've had so far. They need to see that the program can stand the test of time. Lysimba nodded, feeling a rush of determination. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. With the right partners, Harlem Scholars could be the kind of program that changed lives on a scale he had always dreamed of. But he also knew this would take more effort than he had ever put in before. This was a pivotal moment. If he could pull this off, the program would never have to worry about its future again. Over the next week, Lysimba worked tirelessly with Dr. Brooks and the team to craft the perfect proposal. They put together detailed plans for curriculum expansion, mentorship programs, community involvement, and, of course, long-term funding strategies. They gathered data from the past few months, showcasing the success of the program and the impact it was having on the kids in Harlem. It was a comprehensive plan that highlighted Harlem Scholars' potential and outlined the steps needed to ensure its sustainability. By the time Lysimba stood in front of the first foundation representative, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This meeting could either make or break the program. The representative, a middle-aged woman named Caroline Roberts, sat across from him, flipping through the proposal with a critical eye. She had a sharp, calculating look, and Lysimba could tell she didn't give praise easily. But as she turned the last page, she looked up at him and smiled. "Lysimba," she said, setting the proposal down. "This is impressive. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this, and I can see the potential in Harlem Scholars. But I need to hear from you directly. Why is this program worth investing in? Why should we give you the resources to grow it even further?" Lysimba took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This was the moment that could change everything. He didn't just want to impress her with facts and figures, he needed her to see the heart of what Harlem Scholars was all about. "Because this isn't just about kids getting good grades," Lysimba began, his voice steady but passionate. "It's about giving them a future where they believe they have the power to shape their own lives, no matter what their circumstances are. It's about showing them that education is the key to their success, and that no one is too young or too small to change the world around them." He paused for a moment, making eye contact with Caroline. "I'm not asking for help just to keep this program going. I'm asking for help to make sure that every child in Harlem, no matter their background or their family's income, has the same opportunity to succeed. We're not just a tutoring service. We're a movement. And with the right support, we can help change this community for good." Caroline didn't respond immediately, and Lysimba's heart pounded in his chest. She was thinking. She was processing his words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Caroline spoke. "You know, Lysimba, I believe in what you're doing. This program has heart. And heart is what makes all the difference. I'm willing to put our resources behind this. We'll fund this initiative and help you build the partnerships you need to grow. But I need you to promise me something." Lysimba nodded eagerly. "Anything. I need you to promise me that, no matter how big Harlem Scholars becomes, you'll never lose sight of the kids. They're the heart of this program. Don't let the money, the business side, or the growth distract you from your original mission. Lusimba's chest swelled with emotion. I promise. Caroline smiled. Then we're in. The breakthrough had arrived. Harlem Scholars was no longer a small, community-driven initiative. It was on the verge of becoming a citywide force, one that could change the lives of countless children. Lusimba's journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that could turn his dream into a reality on a scale he had never imagined. The phone call with Caroline had changed everything. Harlem Scholars was officially partnered with one of the biggest foundations in the country, and Lusimba was filled with a sense of accomplishment he could barely comprehend. This was the moment he'd worked for, the validation he needed to take the program to the next level. The funding was secured. The resources were available. Harlem Scholars could now expand in ways Lusimba had never dreamed possible. But as the days passed, he couldn't shake the growing anxiety in the pit of his stomach. The excitement was still there, but it was now mingled with the pressure of making sure the program didn't just grow, but thrived. More kids meant more logistics. More staff meant more coordination. More funding meant more responsibility. He had the support, but now it was time to take that support and turn it into something tangible. Lusimba spent the next few weeks coordinating with Dr. Brooks and the team, mapping out a detailed plan for expansion. They began to scout for larger spaces, evaluate additional staff needs, and restructure their curriculum to accommodate more students. Harlem Scholars would no longer just serve a small group of kids from the immediate area, it was going to be a citywide initiative, impacting thousands of students from all over Harlem. But with this new chapter came new challenges. It was a Wednesday morning when Lusimba received an email from his old mentor, Professor Henderson, with the subject line, "We need to talk." Lusimba's heart sank. Professor Henderson had been his guiding light through so many challenges in his life. The man had helped him get into Harvard, pushed him to believe in himself when he thought it was impossible. The last thing he expected was an email with such a vague subject. He opened it immediately, and the words on the screen took him by surprise. Lusimba, I've been hearing a lot about Harlem Scholars lately, and I wanted to reach out. I have some concerns about what you're doing and where you're headed. I think you're making a big mistake. We should talk. Lusimba stared at the screen, a million thoughts racing through his mind. What was Professor Henderson concerned about? He knew the man was always straightforward, but this felt different. This wasn't a message of encouragement. This felt like a warning. He quickly typed a reply, "Professor, thank you for reaching out. I would love to talk. Let me know when you're available." The response came almost instantly, "How about Friday afternoon? I'm in town. Let's meet at the coffee shop." Lusimba arrived at the coffee shop early, as he always did. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, nervously tapping his fingers on the table. He hadn't seen Professor Henderson in years, but the mentor-student relationship had remained strong. Now, though, it felt like there was a rift between them. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like the man he had always admired was now questioning everything he stood for. Professor Henderson arrived exactly on time. He was older than Lusimba remembered, his hair peppered with gray, his once sharp suit now more worn. But there was no mistaking the same intensity in his eyes. He sat down across from Lusimba, his gaze studying him for a moment before he spoke. "Lusimba," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "I've been following your progress with Harlem Scholars. I'll admit, I'm impressed with how far you've come. But I'm also concerned." Lusimba swallowed hard. "Concerned? What do you mean?" Professor Henderson leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the table. "I've seen programs like this fail. I've seen young, passionate people like you burn out. You're growing fast, Lusimba, but I don't think you're prepared for what's coming. This kind of growth requires more than just passion. It requires systems, processes, and, frankly, a level of experience that you don't yet have." Lysimba's chest tightened. I'm not ignoring the challenges, Professor. I've been working with experts, Dr. Brooks and his team. We've got a plan, and the funding is there. We can do this. I know you think that, Professor Henderson said, his tone calm but firm. But I don't think you fully understand what you're stepping into. Harlem Scholars is about more than just teaching kids. You're creating a whole ecosystem. A lot of lives are depending on you now. And if you don't manage that responsibility correctly, everything you've built could fall apart. Lysimba felt a surge of defensiveness. You think I don't understand responsibility? I've been running this program for months, building it from the ground up. I know what I'm doing. Professor Henderson raised a hand, his expression softening. I'm not questioning your ability, Lysimba. What I'm questioning is your approach. You've got big dreams, and that's admirable. But if you're going to make this work long-term, you're going to need to bring in people who can help you scale effectively. I'm talking about experienced managers, financial strategists, people who can help you turn your vision into something sustainable. Lysimba sat back, the weight of his words sinking in. He had built Harlem Scholars on his own, his passion, his determination, his belief in the kids. But was that enough? Did he really have the systems in place to take it to the next level? I understand what you're saying, Lysimba replied quietly. But I've worked so hard to make this personal. I don't want it to just become another organization with layers of bureaucracy. The kids, the community, they're why I started this in the first place. Professor Henderson smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I get it. I do. But the reality is, you're about to enter a whole new ballgame. It's no longer just about your dream, it's about managing a large-scale operation. And you need to be ready for that. Lysimba nodded slowly, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders. Maybe he had been too focused on the passion and not enough on the practicality. Maybe he had been so wrapped up in making Harlem Scholars a success that he hadn't thought deeply enough about the logistics and sustainability. As the meeting ended, Lysimba walked out of the coffee shop with a heavy heart. Professor Henderson's words were true, and they had hit him harder than he expected. He had been running on adrenaline, driven by the belief that if he worked hard enough, everything would fall into place. But now, reality was starting to sink in. He couldn't do this alone anymore. That night, as Lysimba sat in his apartment, he pulled out his phone and called Dr. Brooks. We need to talk, Lysimba said when Dr. Brooks picked up. Of course, Dr. Brooks replied, his voice filled with curiosity. What's going on? I think I've been missing something. We've got to start thinking beyond the passion of Harlem Scholars. We need systems, structure, and people who know how to scale this thing properly. I'm not sure I can do it on my own anymore. Dr. Brooks was silent for a moment before responding. I'm glad you're realizing this. It's time to bring in the right people. It's going to be a challenge, but we can make it work. Lysimba leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the bright lights of Harlem below. He had always known that Harlem Scholars had the potential to change lives, but now, he realized it was up to him to build the framework that would support that change. The dream had always been his, but the responsibility of making it last was now bigger than him. The next phase of Harlem Scholars wasn't just about growing, it was about growing wisely. And Lysimba was finally ready to face that reality. In the weeks following his conversation with Professor Henderson, Lysimba made one of the hardest decisions of his life. Harlem Scholars had grown quickly, almost too quickly, but now it was time to take a step back, to slow down and rebuild from the ground up. The program wasn't just about helping kids, it was about building an institution that could last long after he was gone. And for that, he needed a team of experienced individuals who could help him scale it correctly. He began by meeting with Dr. Brooks, Kayla, and the rest of the leadership team. The air in the conference room was thick with anticipation, but also a little bit of fear. They had seen the incredible momentum of Harlem Scholars. They had been riding high on the wave of success. But now, Lysimba had to tell them the truth, the time had come to restructure. "We've come so far," Lysimba began, his voice steady but laced with a quiet seriousness. "But we're not ready for what's coming. We've been growing fast, and now we need to make sure we can sustain it. We need to build systems, processes, and a team that can handle the growth." The room went silent. Kayla, ever the realist, spoke up first. "So, what are we talking about? Are we shifting focus? Or do we need to scale down?" Her voice was full of concern, but Lysimba could tell that she trusted him to make the right call. Lysimba paused, feeling the weight of the decision. "No. We're not scaling down. We're scaling up, but in a way that's sustainable. I've been pushing us to grow without thinking about the foundation we need to support that growth. We need to bring in experienced managers, a stronger financial team, and experts who can help us build a strategy for the next 5 years, 10 years. Dr. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. Without the right structure, we're just throwing money into a fire. We've got to be more strategic." Kayla crossed her arms, clearly processing the idea. "Okay. So, what's the plan? How do we do this without losing what makes Harlem Scholars special?" Lysimba leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "We don't lose what makes us special. We strengthen it. We keep the heart of what we do, connecting with the kids, providing mentorship, focusing on education, but we make sure that we have the resources, the systems, and the team in place to make it sustainable." The next few weeks were a blur of interviews, planning sessions, and tough decisions. Lysimba and his team began to bring in consultants, financial experts, and experienced program managers who could help Harlem Scholars scale effectively. They found a grant writer who could help secure long-term funding and a new CFO who understood the complexities of running a nonprofit on a large scale. But the most difficult decision of all was hiring an executive director. Lysimba knew that to keep the program running while he focused on the big-picture vision, he needed someone who could manage the day-to-day operations. It had to be someone who understood the mission but also had the expertise to make it thrive. After weeks of interviews, they finally found someone, Olivia Thomas, a seasoned nonprofit leader with years of experience managing programs that served underserved communities. Olivia was sharp, articulate, and, most importantly, she understood the unique needs of Harlem Scholars. She immediately clicked with Lysimba and the team, and after a long deliberation, they offered her the position. When Olivia walked into the Harlem Scholars headquarters for the first time as executive director, Lysimba couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She was exactly what they needed, calm under pressure, confident in her abilities, and dedicated to the mission. Most importantly, she wasn't afraid to challenge Lysimba when necessary. Lysimba and Olivia quickly developed a strong working relationship, one built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. Olivia focused on restructuring the operational side of the program, implementing processes for everything from student recruitment to staff management to financial oversight. She introduced a more rigorous approach to measuring impact, ensuring that Harlem Scholars could prove its value to both the community and its funders. But Lysimba knew that the real challenge lay in maintaining the program's culture. Harlem Scholars had always been about heart, about connecting with kids on a personal level. Olivia understood this, and she worked to keep that personal touch alive, even as they added systems and protocols. "We can have structure and heart," Olivia told him during one of their early meetings. "But we have to remember why we're doing this. These kids are counting on us, not just to educate them, but to believe in them. That belief is what sets us apart." Lysimba nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm glad you're here, Olivia. I need someone who understands that. We've built something special. I don't want to lose that in the process of growing." "You won't," Olivia replied with a smile. "Together, we'll make sure Harlem Scholars stays true to its mission while also becoming the kind of organization that can impact thousands of lives." As the weeks went by, the changes began to take shape. Harlem Scholars was no longer just an idea. It was a thriving, structured, and sustainable program that was ready to take on more students, expand its reach, and make a real difference in the lives of young people across Harlem. Lasimba continued to meet with his team regularly, ensuring that their commitment to the kids never wavered. He spoke at community events, raising awareness for the program and forging new partnerships with local businesses, schools, and organizations. He made sure that Harlem Scholars stayed visible, that the community knew they were growing, and that the kids they served were at the heart of every decision. But even as Harlem Scholars expanded its operations, Lasimba never lost sight of the kids. He continued to meet with students, attend their events, and sit down with them in small groups, asking about their dreams, their struggles, and what they needed from the program. One afternoon, as he sat in the community center with a group of high school seniors, one of the students, Jamal, turned to him. "You're really doing all of this for us, huh?" Jamal asked, his eyes wide. "You could have gone to Wall Street, or done whatever people like you do, but you're here. You're really building this for us." Lasimba smiled, the weight of the last few months lifting off his shoulders for a moment. "Yes, Jamal. This is for you. And for all the kids who need someone to believe in them." As Harlem Scholars continued to grow, Lasimba knew that this was just the beginning. The foundation had been built, and now it was time to see how far they could go. But there was still so much to do, so many kids to reach, so many lives to change. And Lasimba was ready for the next chapter. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Lasimba felt ready for whatever came next. With the right team, the right systems, and the right heart, Harlem Scholars could do anything. And they would. Just when Lasimba thought the road ahead would be smoother, the first major obstacle hit. Harlem Scholars was expanding faster than anyone had anticipated, and with that growth came the inevitable hurdles, logistical nightmares, staff concerns, and, most surprisingly, an increasing amount of resistance from the very community he had worked so hard to serve. It started with a series of emails from concerned parents. At first, Lasimba thought it was just an isolated issue, parents worried about changes in the curriculum, their children's safety, or new administrative staff. But as the days went on, the concerns grew louder and more frequent. The expansion was causing a shift in the program's intimate, family-like feel. Parents feared that their kids would become just another number in an overcrowded system, lost in the shuffle. Lasimba met with Olivia and Dr. Brooks in the office one afternoon, a stack of emails in front of him. The tension was palpable. He had spent years building trust within the community, and now it felt like it was slipping away. "I don't know what to say," Lasimba said, his voice strained. "These parents feel like they've been left out of the process. They think the program's losing its personal touch. They're worried we're going to become just another institution, and they're right. We're growing so fast, we can't keep up with the demand, and now we're losing that connection." Olivia flipped through the emails, her brow furrowed. "I see what they're saying. They don't want the kids to feel like they're just another statistic, another face in the crowd. But we also can't just stop growing. We have to strike a balance." Dr. Brooks spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Lasimba, the thing is, growth often comes with resistance. Change is hard. We knew this was going to happen. What matters now is how we handle it." Lasimba looked out the window, his mind racing. He had always believed that Harlem Scholars was a place of community, a place where every kid mattered. But now, as the program grew, it was clear that some of those very qualities were being questioned. He couldn't let that happen. "We have to find a way to keep that personal touch," Lasimba said, determination creeping back into his voice. "This is about the kids. It's always been about the kids. But I also want the community to feel involved, not just as recipients of our services but as partners in this journey." Olivia nodded. "We're going to have to go back to the drawing board. We need to find ways to involve the parents, engage them in the process, and make sure they feel heard." That weekend, Lasimba decided to hold a town hall meeting with the parents. It would be a chance for them to voice their concerns, ask questions, and, most importantly, feel like they were a part of the process. The last thing Lusimba wanted was to alienate the very people who had trusted him with their children's futures. The town hall was held at a local community center, and as the evening drew near, Lusimba couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach. He had spoken at numerous events before, but this was different. These were the parents of the kids who had helped make Harlem Scholars what it was. If they didn't believe in what he was doing, nothing else mattered. As he walked into the room, he was met with a sea of concerned faces. Parents sat in small clusters, chatting quietly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Lusimba took a deep breath and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice strong but humble. "I know that change can be difficult, and I understand why some of you are worried. But I want to reassure you that Harlem Scholars is and always will be about your kids. It's about giving them the tools they need to succeed. But more than that, it's about making sure they feel seen, heard, and supported in ways that go beyond just education." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but some faces remained tight with concern. "I want to hear your thoughts," Lusimba continued. "I want to know what's working, and what's not. What are you worried about? How can we do better? This is your program just as much as it is mine." The room fell silent for a moment, and then a father raised his hand. "I get what you're doing, Lusimba. I do. But I'm worried about my daughter, Kiera. She's been with you since the beginning, and I've seen how much she's grown. But now that you're expanding, I'm afraid she won't get the attention she needs. She's a shy kid, and she's not the type to speak up. How will you make sure she's not lost in the shuffle?" Lusimba's heart sank. He'd heard this concern before, but hearing it from a parent who had trusted him with his daughter's future hit hard. He knew exactly what to say, though. "We've heard those concerns, and we're actively working on ways to keep the personal connection intact," Lusimba said, his voice filled with conviction. "One thing we're doing is implementing smaller mentoring groups. Instead of just having one large group, we're going to create more focused, smaller groups where each child can get more one-on-one time with our mentors. We want to make sure that each kid, whether they're shy like Kiera or outgoing, gets the attention they need to thrive." The father nodded, though his face remained guarded. Lusimba could tell that it wasn't just about words, it was about delivering on promises. Another parent spoke up. "I've seen the changes, but it feels like things are happening too fast. Are we sure we're doing this the right way? Can we really handle this growth without compromising what we've built?" Lusimba felt a pang of doubt, but he knew he had to respond confidently. "We're moving carefully, step by step. I'm not going to let us grow just for the sake of growth. Every decision we make is with the community in mind. We're working with experts, advisors, and people who've scaled organizations like ours before. But I promise you, we won't lose what makes Harlem Scholars special. We can grow without losing our heart." The room was quiet for a moment, and Lusimba could feel the weight of every eye on him. This was his moment. If he didn't convince these parents, the foundation of Harlem Scholars could crumble. But he believed in this program. He believed in the kids, and he believed in the community. "We've been through a lot together. I know we're facing growing pains right now, but I'm asking you to stick with us. Let's work together. Let's make Harlem Scholars a place where every kid, has the chance to succeed. But we need your trust to do it." For the first time that evening, the room fell silent. Then, one by one, parents began to nod. They weren't all completely convinced yet, but they were listening. They were willing to give Lusimba the chance to prove that Harlem Scholars could grow without losing its soul. As the meeting wrapped up, Lusimba felt a sense of relief. There was still work to do, but for the first time in a while, he felt like the community was beginning to understand. That night, Lusimba sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had been said. The road ahead was filled with challenges, no doubt. But Harlem Scholars wasn't just his dream anymore. It was theirs. And together, they would make sure it worked. The challenges were rising, but so was the resolve to meet them. The weeks following the town hall were a blur of long meetings, sleepless nights, and mounting pressure. Harlem Scholars had managed to address the concerns of the parents, but the underlying issue remained: the program was growing faster than its funding could keep up. The increased operational costs, coupled with an ever-expanding team, began to stretch the organization thin. Lusimba knew they needed more financial backing, and fast. It started with a phone call from Olivia one Thursday morning. Lusimba could hear the tension in her voice the moment she greeted him. "Lusimba, we've got a problem. Our current funding sources are running dry, and the upcoming grant proposals we've been working on aren't going to cover the next few months. We're facing a shortfall," she said, her words clipped but full of urgency. Lusimba felt his stomach drop. He had known this day was coming, but hearing it from Olivia made it all the more real. "How much of a shortfall are we talking about?" he asked, his voice steady, but inside, he was already calculating the worst-case scenario. "We're looking at a gap of at least $150,000 for the next quarter. If we don't secure additional funding, we may have to scale back some programs, and that could hurt the kids we're serving." Lusimba leaned back in his chair, staring at the walls of his office. The weight of the entire program felt like it was pressing down on him, and the responsibility was suffocating. Harlem Scholars had become more than just a project to him, it was his life's work, his legacy. He couldn't let it all unravel now. "I'll figure it out," he said, his voice resolute. "Start by prioritizing what's essential. We need to make sure the kids' education and mentoring don't get compromised. I'll start reaching out to potential donors." "All right, I'll get to work on the logistics and tighten up the budget where I can," Olivia replied. "But we both know that we can't just keep cutting costs. We need new revenue streams. This can't be a band-aid solution." Lusimba hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Olivia was right. Cutting corners and scrambling for quick fixes wouldn't solve the larger issue. Harlem Scholars needed a sustainable financial model, one that would support the program for years to come. But where could he find that kind of money? The days that followed were a whirlwind of calls, meetings, and fundraising pitches. Lusimba called in every favor he had, from the business leaders he'd met at events to former mentors who had helped him navigate the early stages of Harlem Scholars. He even reached out to investors who believed in the program's mission but had never previously considered funding education-focused nonprofits. But despite all his efforts, progress was slow. A few donors expressed interest, but none had the resources to make the impact Harlem Scholars desperately needed. As the deadline for the financial shortfall loomed closer, Lusimba couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of options. The weight of his decision-making was taking its toll on him, both mentally and physically. His usual sense of calm was slipping, replaced by the gnawing anxiety that maybe he had overestimated his ability to handle this responsibility. On a late Friday evening, after yet another unsuccessful meeting with a potential donor, Lusimba sat in his office, staring blankly at the pile of paperwork in front of him. The office was empty, everyone else had gone home, but Lusimba remained, consumed by the problem that seemed to have no solution. The once vibrant energy that he had poured into Harlem Scholars was now replaced with exhaustion and frustration. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Kayla, her expression soft but serious. She stepped inside, holding a cup of coffee in her hands. "You still here?" she asked gently, setting the coffee on his desk. "I thought you might need a break." Lusimba let out a long sigh. "I can't take a break, Kayla. The program is in trouble. We need funding, and no one's stepping up." Kayla sat down across from him. "I know you're stressed, but you can't do this alone. Let's take a step back and think about this." "I've thought about it, Kayla." "There's nothing else to think about," Lusimba snapped, his frustration spilling out. He immediately regretted the harshness of his words but didn't take them back. He was too overwhelmed to care. Kayla didn't flinch. "I get it. It's a big weight to carry. But listen to me, if Harlem Scholars was just about you, if it was just about your drive, it would have already fallen apart. But this is bigger than that. We've got an entire community behind us. You've built something real. You've inspired so many people. And right now, that's what we need to lean on. Lusimba sat up straighter. What are you saying? I'm saying we don't need just big donors. We need the community. We need the people who believe in Harlem Scholars, not because it's a program, but because it's a part of their lives. We can start a campaign, a grassroots movement that gets people to rally around us. It doesn't matter how small the donations are, as long as we get everyone invested. Lusimba leaned back in his chair, considering her words. A grassroots campaign? You think that could really work? Kayla smiled, her confidence unwavering. We've already seen what kind of impact we can have on the community. People care about this program. They want to be part of something bigger. All we need is a spark. And so, with Kayla's encouragement, Lusimba took the leap. The next day, they launched the Harlem Scholars for Harlem campaign, a fundraising initiative that aimed to involve the entire community in the program's survival. It wasn't just about asking for donations, it was about showing the community what Harlem Scholars had done for their children and families, and giving them a chance to contribute to its future. The campaign was promoted through social media, local events, and word of mouth. Harlem Scholars hosted open houses at their facilities, inviting parents, students, and alumni to share their stories and connect with the program. The message was simple: this is your program. Help us keep it alive. The response was overwhelming. Parents and local businesses rallied around the cause, donating what they could. Alumni returned to share their experiences and encourage others to contribute. Small donations turned into large ones, and within weeks, the campaign raised over $100,000, enough to cover the shortfall for the next few months. Lusimba couldn't believe the outpouring of support. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the collective belief in the program and its mission. Harlem Scholars wasn't just his dream anymore, it was a shared dream, a movement that had become part of the fabric of Harlem. One evening, after the campaign had reached its goal, Lusimba stood at the front of a community event, looking out over the crowd. For the first time in weeks, the pressure felt a little lighter. The funds had been raised, but more importantly, the community had stepped up. Harlem Scholars had been tested in ways he hadn't expected, but it had passed with flying colors. As he spoke to the crowd, Lusimba felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future of Harlem Scholars wasn't just in his hands, it was in the hands of every person who believed in the kids, in the mission, and in the community they had built together. And for the first time in a long time, Lusimba believed that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days following the success of the Harlem Scholars for Harlem campaign were a blur of excitement, gratitude, and optimism. Lusimba had watched the program evolve over the past few months, and although there were still challenges ahead, there was something undeniably different in the air. The community had stepped up, and it was clear that Harlem Scholars had become more than just a non-profit, it had become a movement. But with success came new expectations. The campaign had raised more than enough money to cover the immediate financial gap, but Lusimba knew it wasn't sustainable in the long term. He had learned that they couldn't just rely on one-off donations or grassroots campaigns to keep the program running. Harlem Scholars needed to grow into a well-oiled machine, one that could operate smoothly and sustainably without constantly worrying about the next crisis. The question that lingered in Lusimba's mind now was, what's next? What direction would he take the program in to ensure that it not only survived but flourished for years to come? It was a crisp Monday morning when Lusimba sat down with Olivia and Dr. Brooks for their weekly strategy meeting. As usual, the office was quiet, the soft hum of fluorescent lights filling the air as they sat around the table, cups of coffee in hand. But today, there was an air of anticipation. Harlem Scholars was about to embark on its next phase of growth, and they needed a plan that could carry them into the future. So, we've got the financials covered for now, Lusimba began, tapping his pen on the table. But we need to make sure this growth is sustainable. We can't afford to let the program get stretched too thin again. What's the next step for us? Olivia, ever the strategist, flipped through her notes. First off, we need to look at diversifying our revenue streams. We can't keep relying on one or two big events or donations to keep us afloat. We need to look at long-term partnerships, grants, and possibly even developing an endowment fund. Lucinda nodded. An endowment fund could be the financial backbone they needed, a pool of money that would generate interest and allow Harlem Scholars to reinvest without draining its reserves. But setting one up would take time and careful planning. I agree. But we also need to make sure we're not losing sight of what makes this program special, Lucinda added. Our mission has always been about the kids. How do we keep that personal, community-based feel as we expand? Dr. Brooks, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. That's the real challenge, Lucinda. As you expand, you risk losing the intimacy that makes Harlem Scholars unique. But it's not impossible to scale and still keep that personal touch. It'll take intentional design. Maybe it's through mentorship programs, personalized learning tracks, or small, local community engagement events. The point is to make every student, every family, feel like they're part of something meaningful. Lucinda's mind was racing. Dar. Brooks was right, they couldn't sacrifice the heart of the program in the name of growth. Harlem Scholars had always been about connection, about making sure no kid fell through the cracks. But now, with their expanding reach, how could they maintain that sense of belonging for every student? Later that afternoon, Lucinda found himself in the heart of Harlem at a small cafe where he often met with community leaders. He had arranged a meeting with several influential figures to talk about Harlem Scholars' next steps and how they could get involved. As Lucinda entered, he was greeted by the familiar faces of his mentors and supporters, Reverend Wilson, a local pastor who had always been an advocate for Harlem's youth, Lisa, the owner of the neighborhood's popular soul food restaurant, who had helped spread the word about Harlem Scholars from day one, and Marcus, a former Harlem Scholars student who had just graduated college and was now working as a financial analyst. Lucinda. Reverend Wilson's booming voice echoed across the cafe. It's good to see you, my brother. What's the good word? Good to see you, Reverend, Lucinda said, shaking his hand. We're making progress. Harlem Scholars is growing faster than we anticipated, but we've got some new challenges to face. I wanted to bring everyone together to talk about how we can continue growing without losing our connection to the community. The group settled in, and Lucinda outlined the current state of Harlem Scholars, its successes, the financial challenges, and the exciting future that lay ahead. He talked about the campaign's success and how Harlem Scholars was now at a crossroads. They could either stay the course and keep growing, or they could risk losing everything that made the program special. After Lucinda finished, there was a thoughtful silence in the room. Lisa spoke up first. I get what you're saying. The community is our backbone, and we've built something strong here. But we can't just rely on the same small group of people to keep things running. We need to look beyond that. We need to find ways to bring more businesses and local leaders into the fold. If they see the value Harlem Scholars is bringing to the community, they'll want to invest in the future of these kids. Marcus, who had been listening intently, nodded. Exactly. I'm living proof of what this program can do. Without Harlem Scholars, I wouldn't be where I am today. But I also know that a lot of people don't realize the potential of what you're building here. We need to find ways to get the word out even more, to show that Harlem Scholars is a safe bet, a smart investment for the future of the neighborhood. Reverend Wilson leaned forward, his eyes intense. You've built a solid foundation, Lucinda. But now, it's time to take it to the next level. You've got to show the world that Harlem Scholars isn't just about providing education, it's about transforming lives, giving these kids the tools they need to thrive in a world that doesn't always make it easy for them. And the way to do that is through partnerships. Start with the local businesses. Then, work your way up. Lucinda sat back, taking it all in. He knew they were right. The community had rallied behind them in the past, but now Harlem Scholars needed to expand its reach. They needed to show the world that this was not just a program, it was a movement. A movement that could change lives, build futures, and give Harlem's youth the opportunities they deserved. That evening, Lucinda stood on the rooftop of the Harlem Scholars headquarters, looking out over the skyline. The city was alive with lights and energy, just like the program he had built. Harlem Scholars had come so far, but Lucinda knew this was only the beginning. There were new horizons ahead, horizons that would require bold decisions, partnerships, and a vision that extended far beyond the limits of Harlem. The world was waiting. And Harlem Scholars would be ready to meet it. The sun was setting over Harlem, casting a warm golden hue across the streets as Lucinda stood in front of the newly renovated Harlem Scholars headquarters. The building, which had once been a dilapidated storefront, now stood tall and proud, a symbol of the program's resilience and the community's unwavering support. It was a place that had become more than just an office, it was a home for dreams, a sanctuary for youth, and a beacon of hope for Harlem. Lucinda had spent so much time focused on the challenges, on the fundraising, the management, the strategy, that he hadn't taken a moment to appreciate the profound transformation that had taken place. Harlem Scholars had grown from a small community initiative to a powerful force in the lives of Harlem's youth. And it wasn't just about the numbers, it was about the lives changed, the families uplifted, and the community strengthened. As Lucinda stood there, he felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. But that gratitude was tempered with a new understanding of what was at stake. Harlem Scholars had become a part of him, and now, the responsibility to shape its future lay not just in his hands, but in the hands of the community, the students, and the many people who believed in the mission. Inside, the offices of Harlem Scholars were buzzing with energy as staff members worked diligently, planning future programs and developing partnerships. Lucinda's desk, which had once been covered with papers and half-empty coffee cups, was now a model of organization. It reflected the new direction the program was heading in, a direction that was far more structured, sustainable, and scalable. Yet even as the program matured, there was an undeniable sense of warmth that lingered in every corner of the building. It was a place that still felt like home. Lucinda took a deep breath and looked at the framed photographs on his desk, images of students, mentors, and moments from events that had defined Harlem Scholars. These photos represented more than just memories, they represented milestones, the proof that Harlem Scholars was truly making a difference. It was then that Olivia walked into his office, holding a folder filled with papers. "Hey, Lucinda. Got the final reports from the last quarter. We've made some major strides in student success rates, and our retention numbers are up across the board," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. Lucinda stood up, a grin spreading across his face. "That's incredible. It's everything we've worked for. I'm proud of what we've achieved." Olivia nodded, placing the folder on his desk. "And there's more. The board meeting next week is going to be a game changer. We've got some big new partnerships on the horizon. Investors, major donors, and even the city government are interested in working with us to expand the program." Lucinda's heart raced. The future was starting to take shape, and it was bigger than anything he could have imagined when he first started Harlem Scholars. "That's amazing, Olivia. You've been instrumental in making this happen. I couldn't have done it without you." Olivia smiled, clearly pleased by the acknowledgement. "We've all worked hard. But it's your vision that has brought us this far." Later that evening, Lucinda found himself at a celebratory dinner hosted by the Harlem Scholars team. It wasn't a grand affair, just a small gathering of the people who had been there since the very beginning. Kayla, Reverend Wilson, Lisa, Marcus, and the entire team were present, sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying the fruits of their labor. As Lucinda looked around the table, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just a group of colleagues or supporters. This was a family. Each person had played a critical role in the success of Harlem Scholars, and without them, none of this would have been possible. The future wasn't just about programs and funding, it was about the relationships that had been built and the collective spirit that held them all together. Reverend Wilson raised his glass. To Harlem Scholars. May it continue to thrive and grow, touching the lives of every child who walks through its doors. The others raised their glasses in unison, and Lasimba felt a lump form in his throat. To Harlem Scholars, he echoed, his voice thick with emotion. And to all of you, without your support, this wouldn't have been possible. I may have started this program, but you've all made it what it is today. Kayla leaned over, nudging Lasimba's arm. You know, for a while there, I thought you were going to burn yourself out, she teased, but her eyes were filled with affection. But look at you now. Look at everything we've accomplished. Lasimba smiled, shaking his head. I don't think I ever imagined it would get this big. But it's not just about what we've accomplished. It's about what we can still do. This is just the beginning. As the evening drew to a close, Lasimba stood outside, looking up at the stars that dotted the clear night sky. The city around him was alive, bustling with energy. It was hard to believe that just a few years ago, Harlem Scholars had been a dream in his mind, a dream that had seemed impossible. But now, Harlem Scholars wasn't just a dream, it was a reality, a thriving force that was changing lives, one student at a time. Lasimba thought about the road ahead. The future was full of unknowns, challenges, and opportunities. There would be setbacks. There would be difficult decisions to make. But one thing was certain, Harlem Scholars would continue to grow, continue to fight for the students it served, and continue to be a place where dreams were made real. As he walked back into the building, Lasimba knew that his journey was far from over. The legacy of Harlem Scholars was just beginning to take shape, and the future was full of endless possibilities. He was ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?